Good morning, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Björn Nilsson, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this seminar, Managing Innovation in Rapidly Changing Times. I'm the president of IVA, and I have the pleasure of being something called the Master of Ceremonies. That means I will clock everything, and I will really secure we keep the time. So that's a message to all the speakers that we have quite a interesting program, I would say. It's spectacular, and I'm sure we will all get excited and enriched through this program. But it's also quite a complicated program. We have two keynote speakers. We have also two panels that will be moderated by Randall Wright from MIT. I should also mention that this meeting is co-hosted by FMV, which is then called the Swedish Defence Material Administration. I think I got that right in English. And also the Technology Academy Finland, which is our sister organization in Finland. We also do this in collaboration with MIT ILP, and ILP stands for Industrial Liaison Program. We will have three welcome addresses corresponding to this organization, and I would like to welcome Mr. Jan Nygren, who's the chairman of FMV, to start with this welcome address.
Well, Your Royal Highness, distinguished members of our academies, ladies and gentlemen, as you probably have noticed, this address is not on the agenda for this seminar. The reason is that we, at the time when the program was written, didn't exactly know if FMV, the Swedish Defence Administration, correctly, Björn, would have a new Director General appointed. Now he is appointed, it's a he, and his name is Göran Mårtensson. He's a general, or a former general, I would say, and he will start his new job the 1st of February. And he had no possibility to participate this morning because of his present work at the military headquarters. And add to that that he is eager, or it's important for him to sort of formally start his job before he represents the administration. So, as Björn said, I am the chairman of the board of FMV, who are called in for service, so to say, this morning, and it's a pleasure to be here. FMV was founded in the 17th century, and ever since, the Material Administration has been a strategic partner to the armed forces, transforming military expressions of capability needs into technical specifications for the development and acquisition of defense material. And FMV have played an important role in supporting innovation in Sweden, mainly, of course, in the field of defense, but definitely not only. Many successful innovations can be traced back to origins in research and development linked to FMV and FMV's activities. Over the years, FMV has had a very close and very productive collaboration with the Swedish defense industry. A kind of modus operandi, sometimes referred to as part of the Swedish model. Within this innovative greenhouse, many successful products and systems have been developed. And as part of FMV's outreach and technology intelligence, the administration has a very fruitful collaboration with MIT under its industry liaison program. This has gone on since 2009. It has offered FMV direct access to the knowledge and opinions of world-class scientists and researchers on topics highly relevant for our strategic decision-making in both military affairs and related engineering disciplines. We constantly need to look for new knowledge. And this doesn't only goes for FMV, of course. And as important, how to reach this new knowledge. FMV's relation with MIT is an important part of this work and ambition. And this seminar is an example of the kind or the type of exchange of thoughts that hopefully brings us to a higher level of intellectual capacity. So on behalf of FMV, I wish you all welcome.
So next welcome address will be by Mr. Leif Johansson, who's the chairman of IVA. So please, Leif.
Thank you very much, Royal Highness. Most welcome to IVA. You've been an active participant, but now also an elected member of IVA. So most welcome to this seminar and be part of the IVA activities. Ladies and gentlemen, let me wish all of you welcome here to IVA. IVA was founded in 1919. We are coming close to our centenary here. One of the issues that we were founded on was how the Swedish economy could be more innovative and more competitive in a global context. So some of the issues that we will be discussing here today are in real truth, absolute important for countries over long periods of time, but also in how you develop a real competitive strength. The methods and the different challenges are changing over the decades. IVA is an organization of many members, and I usually say that if you want to have a very educated opinion on most anything, you should ask IVA and IVA members. And there is, you will get an opinion certainly, and in most cases you will get a very educated opinion on most everything. The challenge for IVA is not to be a stage for a great number of soloists who are indeed very, very good in what they do in their own right. The challenge for IVA, we do that obviously, but the challenge for IVA is also to be a choir that can sing with a strong force, all of these members coming together in such a way that the society around us, the politics of the world, be they in Sweden or be they in the EU, for example, or even in the world, listens in a good way. And we are trying to attempt to do that very well. In this case, today we are together with our colleagues in the setup of this seminar. We are looking at how we can be more innovative. When I was a young man in the 70s, I worked for a company that took on trying to offset the downturn of the textile industry in those times in western parts of Sweden. And we did that in a company called Endeavo. And I'm an engineer. My assignment on the whole setup was to try to find good product ideas. And I think it's important to note that in the 70s we talked about product ideas that could be turned into economic success as small companies. And my colleagues in the company we had an idea that we should mix economics, technology, and behavioral science in most everything we did. And those are the days of the early entrepreneurship, McClelland in psychology and behavioral science, etc. We were what we thought were quite successful when we had 4 of 100 attempts actually be successful and remaining after 10 years. And that really taught me how sensitive and how critical these types of processes are, and how important it is that you have both a depth and the breadth of approach when you try to make countries more innovative. I'm much looking forward to hear these challenges that we have now. And I think most notably we can note that not everything is about products any longer. There's a lot about business models and services, and for that matter, computer science and technology. So let me wish all of you welcome to this seminar.
So next welcome address will be by Professor Maria Makarov, who is Chairman of Technology Academy Finland, TAF. So please.
Your Highness, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President of IVA, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here to see the fantastic premises that IVA has. It's a great pleasure to work with you, dear colleagues, to get to know you. Technology Academy Finland, in short, TAF, is an academy of academies, not of people, like IVA. TAF was established 10 years ago by high-tech industry together with the government of Finland and academic institutions. The main mission is to award one of the world's most important innovation prizes, which is the Millennium Technology Prize, under the patronage of the President of the Republic of Finland. The next prize will be awarded on the 24th of May in Helsinki. The topic of today's seminar is extremely timely. The world is changing with an incredible pace. The way in which research and innovation is carried on is changing cross-border collaboration and intersectorial collaboration, indeed yielding the best results. The topics are changing. We have the grand challenges of our individual national societies and the grand challenges of the world. Managing those challenges, we need research and innovation for. The ways research is done, what concerns now data, generation of data and use of data is changing, and access to data is increasing, and this gives new opportunities for innovation. Also, public-private partnerships become more and more relevant, more and more needed, even in the world's most expensive scientific and innovation mission, which is the human settlement of Mars, which will begin in 2024. Thank you very much.
So in the program we will have 2 keynote addresses. In between we will have a very important topic called coffee break, and then we will have 2 panels make sense. Before we embark on these 2, I would say, very distinguished speakers, who I'm sure will thrill us all with their insights, we will have Randall Wright to present, give an introduction to MIT. MIT does not need much introduction. It's the highest ranked university overall for several years in a row, I would say. It's also the highest ranked when it comes to entrepreneurship. So it's a phenomenal institution. We all know that. But they also have a very active liaison program, and the senior liaison officer is Randall Wright, who will give the quick tour that we need to know before understanding more about MIT. So please, Randall.
Well, Your Royal Highness, Mr. Chairman, members of the Academy, I want to say firstly thank you to all of you for being able to join us today, and for the wonderful help that we've had from FMV and also from the Royal Academy to put the program together today. What I thought I would do is to give you a little bit of a context in which we can look at what our speakers are going to talk about today. And just a few slides about MIT to put it in context. Let's see if we do this. Well, I have to go backwards here. Let's see. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, now we start at the beginning. MIT is focused on practical inventions of commercial value. That's a very important part of MIT. You know, Steve Jobs said a very interesting thing years ago. He said the doers are the major thinkers. And that fits in very closely with MIT's motto, which is mens et manus, mind and hand. The people at MIT are busy creating technologies, but they are technologies with meaning. And that's why so many of them go on to commercialization. And part of the reason that we have such success in that, I think, is because of interdisciplinary research. Faculty members can work with any other faculty member at MIT. They're not siloed. There's an entrepreneurial ecosystem that spurs innovation. We have extensive patenting and licensing, and MIT ranks first in industry expenditures in research. we're a central node of the very vibrant economy and innovation in Kendall Square in Boston. Startup companies are founded by groundbreaking technologies from MIT. It really is a nexus of companies, faculty members, and all forms of leaders who are really interested in changing the world with innovation. And our proximity allows for a fluid flow of ideas and information and resources. This is a brief picture of the patenting picture at MIT. So many, many technologies that are developed at MIT go on to being licensed, and those go on to startup companies. And the innovation ecosystem at MIT is actually pretty extensive. This is just sort of a picture of that, of not only companies that have located near Kendall Square, and you know we have a new company that's just moved to Boston, that's General Electric, has just decided to move from Fairfield, Connecticut, to put its headquarters in Boston. And it's really this lively environment that is part of the innovation ecosystem at MIT. So that may set something of a context for our speakers, Michael Schrage and also Peter Glor. And again, I want to thank everyone, the Royal Academy, FMV, for making this program possible today. And I hope that you'll enjoy yourselves and be some good takeaways from the conversation. Thanks.
So, thank you, Randy. First keynote speaker will be Michael Schrage, and I will give you mention some credentials before, but please, you can remain here. Thanks. I know we see the eagerness of MIT faculty. Michael Schrage is a fellow at the MIT Sloan School Initiative on the Digital Economy. His research focuses on behavioral economics of models, prototypes, and experiments as collaborative media for managing innovation risk. He's also himself an angel investor, and he's also the author of a bestseller, Innovators' Hypothesis. And I'm sure you will stir us up a lot today, Michael, so please.
Thank you. And it's not just an issue of eagerness, I'm concerned about my technology here. So, and I'm going to see,
switch to your computer?
There we yes, we need to switch to the machine.
So we're live streaming, so that's why you need
we're
to
live streaming.
If you want to move around.
Okay.
Otherwise you have to stay put.
Thanks. My apologies as I get this up here. Are we good? Excellent. Your Highness, hosts, distinguished guests, it's a genuine pleasure and honor to be here. And I really look forward to the opportunity not just to present some of my thinking on these issues of innovation, but the interaction through the panel and questions and comments. I'm going to offer not just a tour de horizon, but a framework, an actionable framework that spins off from some of the research and advisory work I've done at MIT, at the Center for Digital Business, and the Initiative on the Digital Economy. Ostensibly, the title is Innovation Transformation, Redefining Human Capital Investment in Digital Markets. And I think the human capital context here is very, very culturally consistent with my understanding and experiences with Nordic countries in general and Sweden in particular. This is really my most important slide. The content of the audience is more important than the content of the talk. Unless I go off on an improvisational riff, I have near perfect knowledge of what I'm going to be saying this morning. I am much more interested in your reactions, positive and negative, to it. By way of context for me, my background is computer science and economics. Spent a lot of time doing work in artificial intelligence. It's very humbling that the majority of the stuff I studied under people like Donald Mickey has basically, except for Bayes' theorem, been obsoleted by events. So it's very humbling. And basically my work evolved into, I mentioned economics. Economics, as you know, is a normative science. Economics is the science how people are supposed to behave. They never behave as they're supposed to behave. So I became more interested in behavioral economics, and kudos to the Bank of Sweden Nobel folks for giving the prize to Danny Kahneman, behavioral economics. I am interested in the behavioral economics of experimentation and innovation in organizations via the models, prototypes, and simulations that they build. As my wife and several former girlfriends will attest, I am not particularly a people person. This will become clear as the talk goes on. But I find and have found that models, prototypes, and simulations that organizations build to explore and manage innovation risk are wonderful lenses and windows into their culture and dynamics. So as much as I'm interested in sitting through people's PowerPoint or keynote presentations about their innovation roadmaps, sooner rather than later, I'm saying, show me the prototype. Show me the model. How do you invest in that prototype? How do you invest in that model? How is that prototype and model a marketplace? This is ties into the book that was mentioned, Innovators' Hypothesis. This is the kind of advisory work that I do with organizations. Simpler, safer, and simpler. Anybody can make innovation more complicated. I think the challenge is how to do it simpler, safer. Innovation is about risk management, not just opportunity creation, and scalable. Local success, not enough. In a global market, you have to be able to scale. This is the big flip that's occurred in the last 20 years of my doing work. When I did my initial research, I was interested in how can people create more valuable innovation? That's what I was fascinated by. And then the more I looked, the more I studied, the more I paid attention to what really was going on in successful marketplaces as digital media became more pronounced and pervasive, is how can innovation create more valuable people? This is not semantic cleverness. This is the organizing principle for the work we're going to discuss today. What is this talk really about? It's innovation, not just as new products or new services or new customer or user experience. Innovation as a human capital investment. I know that I'm in Stockholm and I'm not a huge fan of the French, and it's unusual for me to quote French sociologists or industrial sociologists, but at least I'm doing the rude thing of doing it in English instead of French. So I saved myself that way. There's this wonderful comment from Monsieur Leplay, Frederick Leplay, who was one of the first of the industrial sociologists. He was the first superintendent of the École des Mines. And when the extractive industries ruled the European economies. And he said the most important product of the mines is the miner. It's not the coal, it's not the tin, it's not the metals. It's the system and value of the people who enable that value to be meaningfully and economically extracted. Okay? Well, that's the old sense. We're in the 21st century, we want to update and upgrade it, so this is my spin on Monsieur Leplay. The most important product of the network is, it's not the bits, it's not the bytes, it's not the bandwidth, it's the networker. The networker, it's the people on, and in the Internet of Things, the devices on the network. You'll forgive my immodest conceit saying, how many of you have mobile devices? All of you have mobile devices. You're the most important product of the networks of which you are a part. Yeah, the phone is nice, the pad is nice, the tablet is nice, but you're the real product in that regard. There's the quote from Churchill about the House of Commons, we shape our dwellings and afterwards our dwellings shape us. It's not a big conceptual or technical leap. We shape our innovations and afterwards our innovations shape us. That makes this a human capital issue. And I mentioned one Nobel laureate in economics. I'll mention the late Gary Becker. This was the model of human capital creation. This is what he won the Nobel Prize for, human capital, in the context of the enterprise. The enterprise, and the quotes here from Microsoft, if you take away the top human capital from enterprises, they cease to be competitive, or they're not nearly as competitive. This is absolutely correct and worthy of the Nobel acclamation which it got, but it doesn't go far enough. What about the customer's human capital? Yeah, the labor is fine. What about the customer's human capital? To a very large extent, what I'm going to be accelerating through in the next 20 or so minutes are the themes that I developed and identified in Who Do You Want Your Customers to Become? It was published by Harvard Business Press. But it's not just going to be a summary and synthesis of this work. It's going to be how does one, a la the spirit of MIT, how does one translate these insights into an actionable framework for innovation? I think that this area is at the intersection of the brand of strategic planning and innovation. That's where I feel multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary efforts must be aligned. So what is this talk really about? It's about what does it mean to successfully invest in the human capital of customers and clients. Let's begin with a classic work in innovation. This is the most successful article in the history of Harvard Business Review, Ted Levitt's Marketing Myopia. It is in the Peter Drucker era. You mentioned McClelland. This is the Peter Drucker era where there was the arguments between what's the difference between marketing and sales and strategy and marketing, and this was really the first of the strategic marketing articles. And the essential question that Ted Levitt asked was, what business are we in? What business are we in? Are the railroads in the railroad business? Are they in the transportation business? Are they in the logistics business? These are classic fundamental questions, and you have to keep revisiting these questions. Why? Because of changes in the macroeconomy and, of course, technological disruption. The classic example he offered was you manufacture buggy whips. There's this thing called the horseless carriage, the automobile, coming out. As the automobile succeeds, as the horseless carriage succeeds, what business are you in if you manufacture buggy whips? Are you in the animal control business? Are you in the fine leather goods business? Are you in the steering business? What's the correct answer? You don't know. You don't know. And that's why top management and strategy is hard. You don't know. You have to choose. And the classic functional organizational question that people would ask is, okay, well, when we talk about innovation, how does innovation, and in a digital era, digital innovation, help us better define and support the business that we're in? So innovation becomes a functional way of supporting how we define the question, the business that we're in. I'm here to say that that question is very good, but doesn't go far enough, and we have to change focus. Everybody in this room knows this guy, Henry Ford. Fordism was transformative. Henry Ford is most identified in business histories, clear metric histories, as what? The father of mass production methodologies. And that was the transformative nature of his innovation and impact in global economy. I am here to say that that is not even 2/3 of the right answer, and that economists, economic historians, and business historians have done everybody a disservice by allowing that narrative to be the dominant and triumphant narrative of innovation. The reality is, and it's the real reality, see, talk about the importance of the controlling the network here. The reality is that the most intriguing innovation of mass production wasn't the mass-produced Model T or the Model A. It's the driver, the human capital of driving. I asked how many of you had mobile devices? How many of you drive? All of you. So where on the OECD balance sheets is the human capital of driving? And just to foreshadow what I'm going to say, what's the value of the human capital of driving in an era of autonomous automobiles? We have Schumpeterian creative destruction as much in human capital as we do in financial and real asset capital. But if the automobile example isn't good enough for you or too 20th century for you, we can talk about Google. I won't ask for a show of hands of how many of you use Google. But people think that Google is what? A search company. How does Google really work? If you know the Web 2.0 methodology and the page rank algorithm, do you know what improves the quality of Google search? You do. What you click on creates the relationship between links and makes searches more efficient. Everybody here who uses Google works for Google, and you like it, and they monetize that. That is why they're one of the most valuable companies in the world, by using that kind of Web 2.0 thing. So, forgive the parochial nature of this, but these are all transformative entrepreneurs. What business are they in? They could answer. But who did they want their customers to become? Is equally, they had a vision not just of the service they provided, but the people who would get value from that service. And I'm here to say that the innovation agenda of the people in this room, particularly if you have an R&D background, is how do you align the answer to the question, what business are we in, with who do we want our customers to become? R&D and innovation people are in the enabling alignment business. How do we do that? How do we do that? The way we do that is that we stop thinking about innovation as a transaction and as a way of making a better or faster product or service. You want to think of what is an innovation in the context of an investment in the human capital, capabilities, creativity, and competencies of customers and clients. Innovation is an investment, not in your products and services, in your customers and clients. Why are new technologies important? Because new technologies create new opportunities to invest in customer futures and future customers. So our dominant human capital challenge in an era of digital abundance is how should our innovations support and shape who we want our customers and clients to become? I'll pick a local example. Spotify. Who do they want their customers to become? People who love music, customers are either want to be comfortable with their playlists or be pleasantly surprised or know more about the songs that they're listening to, which is why they cut the deal last week with Genius. It is a way of adding value to the service. And I just saw when I logged on this morning that there's an announcement that they're partnering with Starbucks. So that if you're listening, you like something in a Starbucks, that can become part of your playlist as well. It's increasing the capabilities of your users to be your vision of your users. I know that Microsoft bought Minecraft, but if you're familiar with the game, more than 1 million people are playing Minecraft all over the world at any given moment. What's interesting to me about Minecraft is not the game or the environment, it's the ability to do modding and modification. What is that? They're tools to improve the game experience or the game design. You're building capability. You're not making a better game. You're giving your users tools to create better games for themselves and their communities. You're enhancing the capabilities of your customers. I'm in Sweden. IKEA, I happen to like this joke. Forgive me on this one. I just thought it was a fairly good one. But it was not until just 3 years ago that actually there was a gray market of YouTube videos about how to put together some of the furniture. And now they finally have their own channel in this regard. And I look forward, I believe there are representatives from IKEA, but that's an investment in the capabilities of your customers, which, by the way, as a meaningful aside, gives you what? Analytics about them, which you can leverage. The best innovations are not ones that make your products and services better. They make your innovation ecosystem more valuable. And here's the line I want you to come away with. Making customers better makes better customers. If you're just making customers better, but they're not becoming better customers, then you're doing philanthropy and charity, which is wonderful, but not if you're a business. And if you're just making better customers without making customers better, then you're predatory and exploitive, and you deserve to suffer fates when better competitors emerge to meet your customers' needs. Doesn't matter whether you're B2B or B2C, professional services or product, investing in your customer client base is key. Alignment here is key. So I want to give 2 quick real-world examples before I go into the framework on this. Over a decade ago, I was on a panel with this woman, Linda Dillman, who was then the CIO of Walmart. And of course, Walmart was doing very, very well, Walmart supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. And we were about to be on a panel on analytics together, and I was saying, boy, you know, when Walmart goes for the customers, does analytics for the customers, the same way that it does for supply chain, you're going to kick the crap out of Tesco, which of course Tesco has other issues, but at the time Tesco had really built a very successful with dumbhumby and analytics capability. And Miss Dillman looked at me as if I were not a particularly smart person. And I don't know why that provokes laughter from you, and she said to me, Michael, we don't discriminate between customers. What is it about everyday low pricing you don't understand? It's everyday low pricing for everyone. They weren't going to do that kind of customer segmentation. And when they finally got around to doing an app, the app that they came up with was Savings Catcher. What is Savings Catcher? You get a Walmart receipt, you submit it on the app, and if there's a lower price in a competing for the product somewhere else, Walmart will send you a gift card to redeem. So no discrimination. So they're not doing segmentation. They're honoring their core value. Everyday low pricing for everyone. You can shop with confidence because if we have overcharged you in any way, we'll send you a gift card. Walmart's a very technically sophisticated company. Perhaps a company that's even more technically sophisticated is Amazon. I talked about behavioral economics, etc. If there's any company that has the analytics to be able to nudge people's buying decisions, it would be Amazon. But Jeff Bezos in this Harvard Business Review quote says, we're not interested in manipulation. We make money when we help customers make purchase decisions. That's it. That's their business. So the issue here is not that these companies don't have the technical capability to do something. They stand for something. Their values, their business mission, their relationship with their customer and client are such as that's not what they're going to do. That is their cultural, organizational, and operational value. These issues are as much about culture as anything else. And when I have worked with organizations, when I've taught executive ed at the Sloan School, the greatest frustrations I come across with are organization and cultural, not technical or financial. It's not the technology, it's not the money. It's what is the organization prepared to do or not to do in defining how it wants to invest in its customers or not invest in its customers. And so, and I don't mean this to be cynical, but I spend a lot of time listening to organizations discuss strategy. Strategy loses to culture 9 out of 10 times. All right, 4 out of 5 times. But I know what I'd bet on. So I want you to take what is about to follow, which I'll do very quickly, from a cultural context, not just from a strategic context. What do we do? What do we do? What should we do if we're really trying to invest in a way that transforms our customers? I'm going to offer the 3S, triple S framework: segmentation, socialization, and skillification. Segmentation, everybody here is familiar with, but I want to deal with it from a slightly different angle. I do work with an organization called Edmunds. It's an online automobile sales site, migrated from paper to web. They make recommendations to what kind of cars you should buy. They work with dealers and shoppers. I was working with them. I asked a very naive, simple question. Does the car that somebody, so you come in, they ask questions about what kind of car do you want to buy. My naive question was, well, does the car they own influence the kind of car they might want to buy? And it turns out, when you run the numbers, very much. There's a bimodal distribution. If you like your car, you want something that's a new and improved version of it. If you don't like your car, you want something radically different. And you can create a more efficient and effective, desirable search faster on this. How expensive do you think it is to add this question to the website? Not expensive. Cheap. What do digital media give us? The ability to do cheap discrimination for segmentation. Not expensive studies, cheap discrimination. Digital media platforms allow us to invest in the mass production of cheap discriminators, QR codes, apps, etc., that allow us to target and segment more efficiently and more effectively. There's value in that. Speaking of Nobel Prize winners, Alvin Roth, market matching. Just like 2 years ago. Harvard, but nobody's perfect, you know. Now, what's one of the issues? You've got a lot of discriminators. So what are the ones that matter? This is the Pareto. I take Pareto seriously. What are the 20% of audiences? What are the 80% of effects that you want to have the 20% explain? You know, I'm of the view that if your organization's it's January 2016, if by June of 2018, your organization is not processing real time between 10 and 100 times more data, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. The question is, how do we get more value from that data? What are the Pareto mechanisms for that? Which clients generate? This one most people know. This one most people don't know. This one, some of the CRM systems and social media systems permit you to do. Defining interactions becomes a very interesting source of cross-functional debate and discussion here. But this is where analytics begin. What are the key 80-20 business questions in your enterprises? What are your KPIs today, key performance indicators today? How do you want them to change in an environment where you have 100 times more data to do segmentation? Yes, you'll keep the financial ones. But what about user experience? What about referrals? Okay, well, when we talk about referrals, socialism. I don't need to talk about social media platforms in Sweden. You guys are very, very familiar with this. The whole notion that we're moving away from just managing of individuals to managing communities. Sephora and LVMH. Sephora's been very, very successful with this. This woman used to be CMO and, by the way, Chief Marketing Officer and CDO. She left to a startup, big shock, from Sephora in San Francisco. But just as a warning, cultural note here, Julia was the Chief Marketing Officer and the Chief Digital Officer. She had Chief Digital, not IT. Marketing had it. Source of debate on this. They're designing to create customer communities that allow self-segmentation, but also customers to contribute value. Why do I find this so interesting that Pinterest users spend 15 times more on Sephora products than Facebook users? Why? For two reasons. One, it shows that different social media invite different kinds of relationships. And the other is that my brother works at Facebook and it really pisses him off. So this is indicative of the Web 2.0 philosophy. This is Tim O'Reilly, who said nice things about my book. What is a Web 2.0? That the service automatically gets better the more people use it, in both meanings of the phrase more. More in terms of quantity, more in terms of quality. It's designed to get better the more people use. Not just to do as well, scaling, it gets better. And the perfect example for this is recommendation engines. For music, for books. Quick show of hands. How many of you use your companies have designed recommendation engines for your customers? That's a handful. I hope we're discussing. Does it work for your company? Makes a difference? Very much so. I look forward to that. It required a collaboration that didn't exist before. So, to me, that's one of the, pun intended, the not so cheap discriminator, is the organization investing in recommendation engines, because that reflects a certain design as well as technical sensibility. But these are the questions that increasingly you need to ask. How do we make it easier for our customers to participate and create connections they see as valuable? How do we make it easier for ourselves to identify value? And as these economics change, how do we organize ourselves to harvest the value of our collective intelligence to boost brands' profit and market share? Nice, simple, straightforward questions. The answers aren't simple and straightforward, but the questions are. The finalists, this is sort of a Strumpelpeter. This is the creepiest picture I could find in regards to skillification. How many of you have apps on your phone? Exactly. There's a DIY, do-it-yourself sensibility that's emerged. And along with that DIY sensibility, we can do what? We can self-quantify, the quantified self. We can measure our own engagement and involvement. And depending on how the app design is, that gives us visibility into how our customers and clients use us. I believe Mr. Johansson has an interesting relationship with SKF. Talk about an interesting capability. I don't need to explain what SKF is in Sweden. But what I really like is the notion of, they developed, I don't know how far along they went with this, but they had some good machine learning algorithms, acoustic algorithms. They created an acoustic app. This is like a Shazam for ball bearing noises. Because you hear something funny, is this something that means you should shut down the machine, you can keep running it, you play it? It gets analyzed for you. An app turns your customers into early diagnosticians for you that do what? Help you allocate your preventive and maintenance resources more efficiently and effectively. Same thing with Khan Academy. Salman Khan, of course, is an MIT graduate. Any of you ever seen the Khan Academy videos? Excellent. How many of you have organizations, have your own Salman Khan inside the organization? Not, again, same I want to stress something here. I'm not saying that these things are breakthrough. I'm saying this is an important way of thinking about how you want to organize to create value. Google discovered that its most effective and happiest customers were the customers who used Google Analytics. So what do? Their first MOOC was, massively open online course, was in Google Analytics. Because if they made their customers better, they'd get better customers. So where does this get you? Triple S. How do I skillify, do I create new skills that facilitate different kinds of socialization and segmentation? If I allow people to share, what kind of emergent skills become important to cultivate? What kind of segments matter? If I segment, how do I support them with skills and sharing? What do large companies do that is self-destructive? They lose interest in the virtuous cycle. What do? They set up a department of skillification, a department of socialization, and a department of segmentation. It's managed independently instead of interconnectedly, interoperably. And we're back to the culture issue. You have more choices. The more choices you have, the more your values matter. When I talk about innovation as an investment in culture, in human capital and capabilities, I want you to think of this kind of framework as a way of testing how you can create network effects around investing in human capital and capabilities. So as we come to the conclusion here, what do digital investment options ask and invite your organizations to become? I hope it invites your organizations to become places that think about segmentation, skillification, and what it means to invest in customers and clients differently. I'm trying to promote a different kind of introspection around innovation. Mirrors and imagery, it's a different way of examining what you want to stand for as a value-creating enterprise. It's not enough that you have a vision statement for the enterprise. What's your vision statement for your customers? And not just the customers. I talk about segmentation. What's the best customer versus a typical customer? How do you want to transform the typical versus the best? What are the two criteria you use to distinguish between your best and typical? Are they just financial or are they something else? I believe that the rise of network economies means, and network organizations, means, forgive the use of this word, that the paradigm for what drives innovation is shifting. We are moving away. This is Bardeen, Bratton, and Shockley. Notice that I'm using a lot of Nobel Prizes. Always play to the home crowd here. Transistor. From research and development to ENS. What's ENS? Experiment and scale. Networks reduce the costs of scaling experiments and transforming an experiment into a product or service or customer experience. That's key, and that's what I wrote about in the book, some of which are up there. So this is going to be my final quote. It's from the British philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead. And he went from Cambridge in England to Cambridge in Massachusetts, but yes, he went to Harvard, not MIT, but again, nobody's perfect. We're not smarter than our parents. We're not smarter than our grandparents. We have better tools, techniques, and technologies that allow us to explore and create value. The most important thing that has happened over the last 40 years is the advance in instrumental design. Instrumental design. Of course, when does this quote? 1925. Does anybody in this room believe that the next 10 years of technical innovation are going to be less interesting than the last 10 years? Shame on us if we don't take advantage of those opportunities. Those are my remarks. I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope I didn't go too much over time. Thank you. Is there time for questions?
Yes, please. Okay.
If-
So,
if-
Michael, please stay. We have time to open the floor for questions, and I would like to start. In Europe, currently in the European Union and in the member state, we have the open digital market as the prime
Right.
priority presently.
Right.
And where that has started is, of course, a lot to remove the hurdles, but also cybersecurity. How do you view cybersecurity as a threat or an opportunity in the framework that you described?
I do work with the Defense Department on cyber conflict kind of issues. I'm very concerned. Of course, in Europe, it's not just cybersecurity; there are privacy issues as well. I think this is going to sound slightly like a weaselly answer, but people need to feel safe and secure. I believe that network integrity and the ability to protect people's information remains important regardless. But, and I mean this very, very seriously, but even if you are very, very concerned about, and your customers are very, very concerned about privacy and security, you can design apps, you can design services that even if that information was public, it would be a marginal harm rather than a significant harm. That's a strategic choice that you're making. Clearly, if you're doing certain kinds of biomedical, then the privacy issue becomes more important. But yes, you must secure the integrity of your data and your network. There's no shortage of entrepreneurial and other efforts to do that. And yes, privacy, and I'm biased, I'm an American, privacy issues, there must be a fair exchange. The default should not be, this is a big argument with my brother, the default should not be openness. The default should be that your customers want to exchange data. They want to answer your questions. They want to use your apps or microservices. Why? Because it benefits them. It is a fair exchange. They're happy with that. It is when you try to force these things down customer throats. What is the best, forgive me for going on long, but what do I now get every time I stay at a hotel or rent a car or whatever? I get a survey. Answer the survey. Surveys are the new spam. I see how it is helpful to the company, but how is this helpful to me? No, I want an exchange. I do not want to be exploited. I want fair exchange. And now I will suck up to my Swedish audience and say, because Sweden has a social sensibility and a social culture which appreciates fair exchange, this may be one of the ways that Swedish companies and Swedish services can brand themselves. That we understand what it means to have fair exchange around digital services and information. and you can be a leader in the EU in that regard, because it ain't going to come from Germany. It's safe harbor, and in France, it's whatever's good for the French.
Yes, I'm sure there could be follow-up. So please, if you have a question for Michael, please wave your hand, and I like to give the short form of instruction. There is a microphone in between every second chair. Please use it. You press the button once. There is a red light, and that means you can speak. So please.
Excellent. Thank you for that instruction. Michael, thank you very much for your presentation. You touched a little bit upon analytics, and coming from SAS Institute, of course, that becomes interesting.
Oh, you're with SAS?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, all right, yes. You better have a recommendation if you're at SAS. Yes, okay.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you, a country like Sweden, relatively small on the globe in general, high knowledge, high energy, done a lot of good things in the digital space. How should we continue to stay competitive as this new world opens up in front of us with, of course, analytics as core, but digitalization as a means of that moving forward?
That is a terrific question, and I will give you a cheap, actionable answer that's slightly technical. Swedish companies that wish to be more effective competitors globally, relying upon their wealth of human capital for analytics, they need to become more adventuresome about utilizing and exploiting other people's APIs, open APIs. You need to have people looking for API opportunities to draw data or write and utilize those kinds of systems and become and it used to be systems integrator and analytics integrator in that regard. The downside that I see from a lot of organizations from smaller countries is that they use those things to get more information, and it informs marketing and it informs planning, but it doesn't change the user experience or the product experience. So if you're interested in wrapping services around a product or a service, or wrapping analytics, what APIs can you exploit to do that in real time? I think this is one of the real advantages that the highly educated knowledge workers of Sweden have. But remember, that's as much a technical skill. They'll have to, if you'll forgive me, be trained at places like SAS, and they'll have to use analytic tools like Jump, and not just Minitab or to be mean, Tableau or R, to do this. But the ingredients are there, and I believe that the gateways are going to be APIs. That's the real tension. How open are our APIs, I think, is one of the most important issues for the analytic and indeed the application future.
More questions? Yes, on the back.
Thank you very much. All the examples you gave.
Please introduce yourself.
All the examples you gave were on business to consumer.
Not true. I gave you the SKF example.
Yeah, true. But most of them were business to consumer.
So you've gone from all to most. Shall we keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I could argue with that on the user side, but when you have big,
I'm highly confident you will argue on that.
Procurement processes.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the paradigm you see in business to business.
Right.
Have you done any thinking around that?
Oh, yeah. B2B, and look, to be completely fair, you're correct. It's biased towards B2C because, as a general rule, when I do classes, most people understand and can empathize with consumers. But in the procurement space, I'm seeing a lot of work done in this regard. The most obvious one is we're seeing organizations giving away or creating APIs that enable access to what? Testing and requirement tools that you can run remember, what was my opening talk? Modeling, simulation, and prototyping. So for a B2B chip supplier, and no, it wasn't Ericsson, but it was a company that Ericsson did a lot of business with once upon a time. They were doing systems integration for chips. And they would give the requirements, and the company would send and there would always be issues. And so ultimately, the company said, to heck with this. They gave them the testing software. Now, this was before networks. They gave them the software. Now you can run the simulation on Hadoop. Okay? So for B2B, how do you do testing, quality control, use case simulations? What kind do we want to change a component or a subassembly? A real world company that is doing this very seriously is Flextronics. Why? Because there's twofold. Number one, they're doing contract manufacturing, but they're also trying to do contract manufacturing with differentiated design. So this is a big issue for them. Another company, this is kind of secret, but it's a fake secret. Apple does the same sort of thing because they're on very, very tight schedules and they simply can't afford to have certain kinds of things. I would argue that one of the reasons why Boeing had the issues it had with the Dreamliner is that it didn't do this. It didn't allow that kind of simulation. It was always very, very late in the game. It was always, what was the classic thing that everybody remembers? You don't inspect quality in, you design it in from the beginning. Okay? As B2B becomes more design-oriented as opposed to meet requirements-oriented, you have more opportunities for collaboration around this. I think that's the future of it. So CAD, the CATIA folks, all of these digital PLM, product lifecycle management, and CAD, CAE stuff, that's all facilitating this kind of segmentation, skillification, socialization.
Okay, more questions, please? And please introduce yourself.
My name is Vahid Kalhouri. I work at Sandvik Cormant, IVA division.
Sure.
Yes, I think we have met before.
Yeah.
Very interesting speech. Thank you for that. And transition from R&D to ENS, very interesting. And I think my question demands another talk from you. What challenges you think that this transformation will put on the organization? Because experimentation is one, and the scaling these experiments. I mean, today we know how to organize our internal R&D, right. But this is kind of external R&D and working in open innovations.
I very much appreciate the question for two reasons. Number one, it's a very good question. Number two, it affirms the cultural issues because it's not the money. I'll give you a very sad but true behavioral economics example. I addressed this in the book, the Innovator's Hypothesis book. Most organizations, by the time, they don't want to do experiments. They don't want to test a hypothesis. They want to prove a hypothesis. They're biased to proving, you've done all this analysis, you've done all this work. I don't want to learn anymore. I want confidence to go ahead. That's a big cultural shift for organizations. Many organizations don't want to fail or have an experiment fail with a customer. But to me, this is a segmentation opportunity. What customers or clients do you have that you feel confident, have a healthy relationship that you both know that you will learn? So it is a win-win rather than, oh, we are embarrassed. I'm sorry to say, this is the embarrassing thing, I'm sorry to say, there is no easy answer to that, but I think it is, how can it be an unhealthy conversation at Sandvik to say, who are our big users who would be happy to do an experimentation around instrumenting the drills or the heavy, doing predictive analytics in an interesting way? Who are the users who are prepared for a higher level of failure in the interest of getting early insight into knowledge and perhaps having a 6-month or a year early window into adapting their processes to take advantage of those analytics? The answer is not going to be all of your customers. Yes. It never is.
Yes, I have a follow-up question. Do you think there is a limitation to the segmentation? And I'm standing here thinking about this. An author, a late author called P.G. Wodehouse, he wrote plays, but also mass books. He had many characters. Period of my life, I enjoyed those books. He had one noble guy. He had a servant named Jeeves.
Yes.
And one who read these. The Jeeves was a perfect segmenter. He was segmented. So he irritated this noble guy because when, for instance, he came up, I think I need a vacation, maybe.
Right.
Jeeves would say, "I've already made the reservations, sir." Yes. Do you think we've only seen the beginning? Because if Amazon would come up with new algorithm together with Walmart, they could perhaps segment together, and with the car company, with types of segmentation. So all of a sudden, you get proposals, suggestions, or you're led in a way you don't want to. You think there is a limitation?
What do you mean? Hold on a second.
Yes.
Not you don't want to. I mean, the irony. I loved P.G. Wodehouse. I liked the clicking of Cuthbert more than I liked Mike Jeeves, but that was the golf. That was the golf stuff.
I remember that.
It was very good. But there's an irony in the P.G. Wodehouse thing that Jeeves always anticipated, and he was annoyed. Not because Jeeves was wrong, but because Jeeves was always right.
Yes.
And the joke was that the servant knew the master better than the master knew himself.
Correct.
And so that's the number one. We're now going to deal with the notion of what do we do in a machine learning environment. You know, by the way, I have $1 billion idea for Amazon. I will share it with you for this. How many of you use Amazon? Excellent. So here's the service. I'm using you as a market test. So Amazon has very good recommendation engines, predictive. Suppose Amazon, and are any of you Amazon Prime? You know, you may not even have it in Sweden, but oh wait, well you're in the U.S. That's cheating. Okay, I'll split it. But the idea is, suppose for an extra small amount of money, Amazon will send you a surprise gift. Okay, and you'll have the option to return it. Okay, it'll be no cost, no risk to you. Would you sign on for that? Would you be interested? I would wager a non-trivial number of people would sign on to that. And look at the data that Amazon would get. That we could call that Operation Jeeves in that word. But we are definitely, the notion of how one interacts with predictive analytics that perhaps may know something or anticipate something before you've thought of it. Will this have a big impact on our self-image? Yes, it will. Just in the same way we've all had this. We've all had, hopefully, we've all had bosses who were very good motivators and they made us feel good about ourselves. And we had bosses who motivated us by making us feel bad about ourselves. Okay? But sometimes, which is most effective in the long run? The design, and this is the role for academia. The lady I was sitting next to from Kotaho yesterday was dealing with this. How one designs interfaces and interactions and environments so that analytics is not just good, but it is accepted. It is culturally compatible with individuals. That's a hard problem. That's a hard problem. And you'll forgive me for saying it's also a organizational cultural issue. We good?
With that, we have to break, and I suggest another applause for a fantastic, not only lecture, but also answers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we'll run to coffee break, and coffee break is an opportunity to mingle, both with the speakers and with each other. We will have a kind of theater procedure. 6 minutes before we start, there will be first ringing. 3 minutes before we start, second ringing. We want to start on time, but we have ample time for coffee, and that's one floor upstairs. So, welcome. We have the second keynote address that will be delivered by Peter Glor. Peter Glor is a research scientist at the Center for Collective Intelligence at MIT Sloan School of Management. Glor is also the founder and Chief Creative Officer, we probably learn later what that is, of the software company Galaxy Advisors. He's also an honorary professor at the University of Cologne and also lecturer at the Aalto University in Helsinki, in Finland. His research focus is on collaborative innovation networks, and he will speak on a very, very interesting title, The Stupidity of the Crowd and the Wisdom of the Swarm. Please.
So the question I have been studying for the last 12 years, why is it that large groups of people can be so smart and so stupid at the same time? And the key concept, I call it swarm creativity, is how innovation really happens. And can we predict it? Can we support it? I'm taking away the answer. Obviously, we have heard that before in Michael's talk, and a lot of it during the coffee break. And the consensus seems to be innovation just happens. It's really hard to identify, predict, and nurture it. I think if we look at nature, we will find some answers. And if you look at the background of my slides, the bees. I grew up in Switzerland on the countryside. My father had bees. At that time, I didn't like it because they were stinging and I had to help with the honey. Now I'm very happy because the bees are great sources of inspiration. And bees are actually A, very creative, and B, quite predictable. And so the same I have found over the last 12 years is true for humans. And the key concept in innovation, the key buzzword for me, the key word is collaboration. And I actually make, and here we see two examples. We see the Tahrir Square, which created something which had great potential. In the end, it didn't work out. On the other hand, we see a team of surgeons at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I work a lot with doctors, where we look how they collaborate and innovate. And while they are quite conservative, I have to admit, medicine professors, it's a very special crowd, but they can innovate. And we use different levels of observation. We start on the global level. 22 years ago, when I left Switzerland, I came to the Advanced Networking Architecture Group at MIT, which was headed by David Clark, who was one of the co-inventors of TCP/IP, email, and so on. So we study since then how people communicate on the internet, which is a great source of communication patterns on the global level. We study how people communicate inside the organization, and by now we mostly do that through email. And we study, and that's the picture you see here, how people communicate in small teams using what my colleague Sandy Pentland, who invented them, called sociometric badges. Those are little devices about this big. You wear them around your neck. So those guys, they are wearing the badges, you just don't see it. And they measure, do we look into each other's eyes? Are we taking turns? Right now I'm talking, which is actually bad. We should take turns for innovation. But I hope I will be very provocative. If you disagree, speak up, and then we get the dialogue going. And are we swinging in parallel with the accelerometer? If our body language starts mirroring each other, it's like the bees. We are becoming in sync, and we're becoming more innovative. And if you're getting closer together, now this has to be calibrated culturally. We are also more engaged. When I do projects, at least once a year I'm in Finland, and the body language and the distance of Finnish, and for example, Indian people is quite different. But either way, you calibrate how people communicate, and then you can predict whether you have innovative or not so creative surgeons. So that's what we do. And when I study collaboration, what I found is that there really is two types of collaboration. One of it I call collaborative competition, which means you collaborate to compete. And the sort of collaboration there would be like the big banks conspiring to rig the exchange rate, for example. They collaborate, but at the end, the main objective is to compete. On the other hand, we have Wikipedians, and their main goal when they create Wikipedia is collaboration, but inside, you just don't see that. They compete for barn stars and other symbols of peer love, and that's quite important also. But the goal is collaboration. And if you look at nature, competition, now, of course, I'm oversimplifying here, ants, because ants have many great characteristics, but the biggest battle on Earth with trillions of soldiers on each side is currently happening for the last 80 years or so in California, with one species of ants, which was imported from the Amazon rainforest. And they know whether they are a friend or an enemy based on their pheromones. Whenever two armies bump into each other, big battle starts. And that's the competition model. On the other hand, I like this one of the bees, where inside the hive, they collaborate for the greater good. They don't need any central leader. And that's, for me, the symbol of collaboration. If we take soccer as the metaphor, then collaborative competition means you have two teams competing against each other. Collaboration, the best team is the one not with the best players, but with the most collaborative players. So you don't have all Lionel Messis or other superstars, and they all want to keep the ball, but you have them passing on the ball to whoever's in the best situation to actually get it into the goal. And that's the collaboration I'm studying. Or if you look at some more metaphors, if you are in the software scene, you might have heard of a website called Top Coder, but also you might not, because it was never very successful. It basically, if you have a software problem, you put up your problem and people compete. That means the best solution gets $10,000, the others get nothing. And I call that homo competitivus. And the problem is you get a winner, but you get many more losers. And if you look at sports, and for example, the Soccer World Championship in Brazil, it's still a trauma. That one particular game between the Germans and the Brazilians, you are never allowed to mention that when you are in Brazil because it's so frustrating to them. And that's why I like the music metaphor much better. If you go to a concert, everybody's happy. Everybody wins. Not half of the fans and half of the team walk out. Everybody walks out happy. And so the software equivalent of that is a website called Stack Overflow. And this is one of the top 100 websites in the world. And it's all about collaboration. And if somebody has a problem, everybody contributes. Everybody shares what they know, and it's a tremendous resource. I was trained as a programmer. I'm useless these days as a programmer, but I'm good enough to use Stack Overflow, because you can just, like Google, if you have a problem, enter it, and Stack Overflow will provide some sort of answer. Collaboration gives you tremendously useful resources. So that's the overall problem that we have been studying. And now back to the original question, what's the difference? Why are crowds, and this is of course just a question of how I'm using the words, stupid and swarms are smart? Why is it that sometimes you have the soccer hooligans, and I think everybody agrees that this is a very stupid crowd. On the other hand, people like those children using another of those MIT inventions, the one laptop per child, I think everybody agrees they are a smart swarm. It's all a question of motivation. Crowds, they are very extrinsically motivated. Money, power, and glory, just like those people chasing money. On the other hand, swarms, they love what they are doing. And of course, they are humans, just like those doctors. So on the side, they also might not mind getting a little bit of money, of power and glory. But the main reason why they are doing what they are doing, they love what they are doing. And swarms, everybody needs to find their passion. And if you have that, then you have created a tremendous engine, so get together like-minded people, of innovation. And that innovation for me is the key construct, and I call it the coin. And coins are about everything but coin, not money. Love what we are doing. And my opening experience was in 1991. At that time, I was a postdoc at MIT, just fresh from Switzerland. I was really happy that I was accepted there. And I had a paper accepted at the ACM Hypertext conference in San Antonio, Texas, about a system called CyberMap, which was like an early web browser, only at that time the web really didn't exist. So I packed up my Macintosh, which was much bigger than the one here, and I flew to San Antonio. I put it up there to demo my system, and then this guy came. I don't know if this person is known in Sweden. It's certainly known at MIT, but not much outside. Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web. At that time, and this is still a picture from 1991, more or less, but he hasn't aged much, and he still, I think, has most of his hair. But he came to my desk, and he asked me whether he could put up a pile of papers and a pile of flyers about a system called the World Wide Web, because he had submitted his paper, and it was turned down, because the program committee had thought that that system would never succeed and had no scientific merit whatsoever. However, he was so passionate, he didn't care. He printed out a lot of papers, he put them into his suitcase, and he flew from Geneva, because at that time he was IT manager at CERN, to San Antonio. And he had figured out that I was Swiss, and so he thought one Swiss guy would help another Swiss guy. Now he is British, not Swiss, but Swiss connection. And of course I was happy to help. And he went to other tables too and asked all of them whether it could put up flyers and papers and organize a special session during lunch. He even brought along his friend Robert Gaillot, and they tried to recruit others, and that's where they created their first coin. Their little group of intrinsically motivated people that together turned a crazy idea into a first prototype. And this little group, the Collaborative Innovation Network, for me, that's the disruptive engine of innovation. In Tim's case, postdocs and PhD students, they are free labor source, more or less. So he tried to invite me, but I thought it will never succeed. It has no scientific merit. I have better things to do. So I was stupid at that time. My boss, David Clark, he was much smarter. He invited Tim to come to MIT. I still remember how Tim was there. And he didn't get an office in the beginning. He only had a desk in the hallway and a very old and clunky computer, and he was sitting there and trying to recruit as many people as possible. He was trying to recruit me again, but I still thought, it's not good for my scientific career. This is non-scientific. It will never succeed. However, he was able to convince the boss of my boss, Michael Dertouzos, who was the head of the lab for computer science at that time. And Michael helped Tim to recruit others to create the World Wide Web Consortium. That's the next level in disruptive innovation. So we have creator, crazy idea, coin, little team of doers, of equals that together turn the crazy idea into a product, and then friends and family of the coin members. They are the learning network. They are hundreds of people. They will try out the crazy product, the crazy idea. They will tell their friends that it is great. Some of them will join the coin, and in the end, there will be thousands of people, and that's the interest network. In the case of the web, it was Marc Andreessen, who was a student programmer somewhere in Illinois, who created a browser called Mosaic, which later on became Netscape, which made the web useful for everybody. And that's the four-step process of disruptive innovation that we see everywhere. If you look at Facebook, Google, and Linux is another great example of open source, Wikipedia is another great example. All disruptive innovations, any startup works like that. And so the key question is, what sets Tim apart? And for the bees, it's well researched by now. It's called the waggle dance. And I'm not doing a waggle dance right now. That's not my forte. But human waggle dance. Tim Berners-Lee did one heck of a waggle dance when he was at the ACM Hypertext conference. How does this work? And that's where those communication archives, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Wikipedia blogs, whether it's email or phone logs, or whether it's face-to-face interaction, come in. If we study them, we will see that people like Tim, they are different. They are different in 3 levels. First, when Tim left CERN behind and came to MIT, what he did, he created a social network. He tried to embed himself into the group that would help him, and that the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, couldn't be any better to do that. So he tried to get many friends, and he tried to get important friends like Michael Dertouzos and David Clark. And that's what we can study. And today, just looking at the Facebook network will tell you interesting things. Just looking at the LinkedIn network also. And by the way, many Facebook friends doesn't really mean you are innovative or creative. It just means you are a busy person trying to amass many friends and not much more. However, there are other, and my colleague Sandy Pentland calls them honest signals, that give you away. And they have to do with time. The speed of response. When Tim was at MIT, I was really struck. If he got an email, in those old days, 1991, that was a rare event. You would get 1 or 2 a day, and then you would read it. You would just be happy that you finally got an email. You would sleep over it. You might think about how to answer it, and 2, 3, 4 days later, you might actually compose a carefully crafted answer. Tim was different. Even then, it took him 2 minutes, and you got a response. I never saw anybody like him at that time, and it really was an amazing experience. And this is still up to today. If Peter sends an email to Mark Zuckerberg, who cares? All of us can send an email to Mark Zuckerberg. However, if it answers Live's email 20 seconds later, then that's because you are the chairman of IVA. If Peter sends an email, I will never get a response from Mark Zuckerberg. It's very sad, but it's more a reality. However, if I'm gone from my mail and I get back, the people I answer first, it's probably my children, my loved ones, my boss. So how quickly you respond will tell how passionate you are. And Tim was awfully passionate, and that's why he answered in 2 minutes. And how quickly others respond to you will tell how much they respect you. So those are 2 honest signals which you can't really see. But in the meantime, we have built software. And so if you just look at your mailbox, if our software takes your mailbox, you will know how passionate you are and how much you are respected by others. Now, can you do that? Is that legal? It's perfectly legal. It's your own email. And it's at the same time perhaps an intrusion into the privacy of others, but it's another of those honest signals. So in that sense, it's what Michael said before, the computer, it's really, it's other people, and they are extending our own capabilities, our own reading of honest signals in ways that were considered impossible just before. So speed of response, that's number 2. And the third one is sharing of content in many different ways. When Tim created the web in about the same time, there was this guy in Helsinki, Linus Torvalds, creating something called Linux. And Linux is even more amazing because Tim, at least he got travel money to fly to San Antonio and do his waggle dance face-to-face. And if you have a chance, going and talking to people helps. Linus, he had no money. So he was just sitting there in Helsinki and sending out his email and saying, I created a little system. It's nothing special. Feel free to take it, but if you make any changes, send them back to me and I will share them with the rest of the world. If you have no money, you have to share your ideas. It's the only way to get it out. And it turns out this sharing is true in many different regards. For example, if you look at the content of your mailbox and you have emails from a friend and you start adopting his or her vocabulary, you start sharing her words, that will tell you that this person is extremely influential. web, browser, desktop. Those are all words which were known before the web, but they were used in another way. So creating a new vocabulary, HTML, HTTP, those are all things that Tim introduced. Others picked them up. And so what we can measure, again, just take your mailbox. And then you see who will give you new words and how quickly they pass on from one to the next. And that will tell you who the most influential and creative people are. A second thing is honesty, emotionality of language. And we discovered that when we studied email archives of large consulting companies and their interaction with customers. And what we found is that the happier the salespeople were talking to their customer, the less happy the customer actually was. Because the salesperson was trying to pamper over some problems and just hyping up stuff. What was a much better predictor was honesty, which means positivity and negativity at the same time. So again, we have those three dimensions. We have connectivity, we have interactivity, and we have degree of sharing, and that's where Tim is. Tim is most sharing, most interactive, most connected persons, and that's what we are trying to find and what we are trying to support. And they don't communicate in structures like this one, which is like a star, but they are communicating in structures like the one that you see here, where everybody talks to everybody directly, and that is really how you want your innovation teams to be. And over the last 12 years of studying hundreds of organizations and teams through email, through Twitter, through face-to-face interaction, we have developed 6 honest signals of collaboration that we can measure through email, through sociometric badges, and through web interaction. And the first one, they are structured along structure, time, and content, is strong leadership. So what you see here is a picture of our software Condor that takes email archives, Twitter archives, and so on, and measures how strong a leader somebody is. So the green ball, that would be Tim Berners-Lee, or Linus Torvalds, or whoever has a creative idea. And then they are exchanging emails or talking to each other, and the more two people look into each other's eyes, the stronger the connection between them gets, the link gets. And when I started studying swarm creativity, I thought that there are no queen bees. Coming from Switzerland, which is more or less like Sweden, meaning we don't believe into strong leaders. You have some strong leaders. We have no kings. We have not even a president. We have 7 of them. So I thought they don't exist. It turns out they exist. So Tim and Linus and so on, they are leaders, but they lead in a totally different way. And this style of leadership, that's the key ingredient, swarm leadership, for getting the culture of innovation. And one of the key things, I call it the 1-9-90 rule. 1% of the people does 90% of the work. 9% of the people does 9% of the work. 90% of the people does 1% of the work. I was at MIT from 91 to 93, and then I decided to go back to Switzerland, where I worked at the largest Swiss bank, which was UBS at that time, and I can confirm that I saw that there too, not just in Wikipedia. The second thing is contribution, which basically means how much of a sender or a receiver of information you are. And it turns out that each of those little red dots is a person, and the farther to the right somebody is, the more active they are, the more high up they are, the more of a sender they are. Tim Berners-Lee is at the upper right top corner. He sends the most, he's so passionate, and he also gets the most, but he sends more than he gets. However, over time, everybody needs to contribute, at least among the leadership team. So that's key issue number 2. Key issue number 3, I call that rotating leadership is the most essential one. And it actually means that if you have just one queen bee, the swarm will die. In a good swarm, you have Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Caillot. You have Sergey Brin and Larry Page. You have Mark Zuckerberg and a few others taking turns. And this turn taking, and the more you oscillate in your collaboration pattern, the more creative you are. And the more the leadership team takes turn, the more creative the team is. And if you show that to a group of people how well they are doing, they will actually change their behavior. So this is the key ingredient, not just in my view. This has also been studied by some colleagues at Sloan. There is Davis and Eisenhardt, two researchers that looked at rotating leadership among large companies like Ericsson, IBM, and so on, and small. And the best alliances were the ones which were always leadership was passing on. And the more it was played back and forth, the better the alliance worked. And if you look at communication archives, whatever they are, you will see that here. And if it doesn't work, it becomes obvious to the leaders. And if they like that rotating leadership principle, sometimes you have people like Donald Trump. He's an imperial leader. He knows everything. I don't think that he would like my method, but he never asked me. So I can't really tell. Speed of response, we already mentioned that. Honest sentiment and sharing of language. Those are some of the key ingredients. And over time, we have studied that with many projects on all three levels, on the global level, on the organization level with email, and on the individual level with sociometric badges. Our software, called Condor, takes those inputs, and it works like a mail client, and in the end, it will produce a lot of statistics. So whatever I'm telling you is been grounded in a lot of statistical analysis. It's basically big data. So you could call me a data scientist, and then we just crunch numbers. We throw that into some SAS or SPSS or MATLAB or R statistics tool, and we come up with those interesting patterns. And we have looked at that on the global level with Wikipedia, where we have found that Wikipedians are also good for the economy. The more Wikipedians a country has, the better its economy is doing. We don't know about the causality. We also looked at Twitter, where in the early days, just the retweet rate correlated 80% with the Nasdaq. This doesn't work anymore, sadly, and I missed out on it when I discovered it. Otherwise, I would not be standing here, but I would probably fly in with my own private jet. But since then, Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber, and many others changed the Twitter behavior, and so predictions aren't so easy anymore in that regard. So we don't do much Twitter predictions for stock trading anymore, but you can still use it, for example, to see how much money a movie will be making. In those things, Twitter is extremely predictable. So Wikipedia, I mentioned this. So we have the number of active Wikipedians. As you see, Sweden and Finland have the highest percentage of active Wikipedians in the population. They are also among the most well-functioning economies, and the correlation is very strong. So one recipe for Greece would be encourage more people to be active Wikipedians. You can also use this to study culture. So we looked at who the most important people are on the world and how much are they within a population. I'm not going into great details here because I don't have the time, but you can see, for example, that the Chinese only write about Chinese. The Americans, out of 50 people, which are the most important ones. And this is a little bit an old project, so George W. Bush is the most central person. I guess today it would be Barack Obama. But only 10 of them are native English speakers, which reflects the makeup of American society. So that's just a few of the things you can do, and I have sadly not enough time right now, but there is a lot of MOOC videos that describe that stuff, and I saw that the Cool Hunting book is up there. There is 2 others that I wrote and 2 new ones which will be coming out this year that describe a lot of what we have been doing on the global level, but also on the organizational level, where we started with looking at email with World Wide Web Consortium and other open source communities like Wikipedia. But today, we get email from very large companies with 100,000 of employees. And then we look at how they communicate, and we can find out amazing things. So when we started, we had to do interviews with CEOs directly. This is one project we did in Israel, where we were able, in 1998, to assess the network by asking the CEOs with whom of their peers they were talking, and 6 years later, checking which of the companies were still around. It turns out, if you have a communication network, you can look 6 years into the future, which is sort of nice. And the CEOs that were willing to answer MIT's question were still around, the others not. I really like that insight. It means if you collaborate with us, it's good for your business, also in the long run. And the more they spoke with their peers, the higher the chance of survival. We repeated the same at a little bit later with Boston biotech startups. We found the same insights. The more they communicated, and the more they showed, that's where we were able to measure rotating leadership, the better they were doing. So this basically just tells you that the more patent applications, it didn't really depend whether they were in Stockholm or somewhere very far north. As long as they communicate, that's all that's needed. And the more they change leadership. We also looked at email of a 90,000 people organization, where based on how team members communicate, you can automatically measure how happy their customers are. And if you tell to the organization how they should communicate, that will make actually their customers happy. We had 240 different teams that were working with 240 different customers. 24 were measured. Their happiness went up by 5% compared to the unmeasured ones, where the customer satisfaction went down by 12%. So if you tell people how they do and how they can do better, that will actually change their behavior. You can also predict whether people will be leaving the company, or you can predict how innovative people are. This is a large energy company, a really big one. We looked at their R&D department, and we looked what's the behavior of the most creative people measured through numbers of patents, numbers of publications, numbers of awards, and the most amazing thing, they don't want to be important. However, they communicate much more with academia, and so if you tell that, it will change their behavior, and you also know who they are, and that is extremely rewarding. So that's some of the organization level. We did it on the individual level with jazz musicians, with medical teams, and so on. So we can measure personality characteristics. Just wearing the badges will tell me whether you are neurotic, open for new things, introvert, extrovert, agreeable. So no need to take a personality test anymore. Just wear the badge and I will know. And I can also look at your mailbox and I can also tell by now. So those are some of the projects that we did. I think I don't have too much time for that. And in the end, it basically means, how can we support that? Creating coins. That means we have those 4 steps. And leaders need to be part of the beehive. That's the key insight. Rotating leadership, doing the waggle dance, and in the end, spreading the attraction pheromone. We are building a consortium right now where we are collecting those honest signals of large groups of organizations, which gives us benchmarks like this one. And I'm putting together those things. I don't have too much time right now, so I refer to my book, studying not quantum physics. I'm not a physicist, I'm a social scientist. Well, I don't know what I am. I started as a mathematician, computer scientist, sociologist. I think today I'm more of a philosopher or court jester, anything, juggling balls. But you can measure how people get entangled, and if you measure them, just like with Heisenberg uncertainty, they will change their behavior. So to wrap up, what can you take from that for yourself? If you look at your communication behavior, the simple insight is, don't be a star, be a galaxy. Much better for your communication. And I would like to close, not with my own words, but with a very nice TED video from here.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that at TED.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for a wonderful lecture. There will be time for a few questions, and I don't know if I should start dancing here and see if you will follow. I would like to start with a question. It's very, very interesting, and you went very fast, but at least I was able to catch most of the findings, the correlations. You can make predictions, and it's almost scary, of course, then to learn that give me your mailbox and I can tell you who you are. And sure. If you add your device, you become almost like a shrink getting inside you. How much do you actually have resources, time, and also engagement to follow up, to see the causal effect, to see the mechanism? Why do you get these correlations, like with biotech companies, where the communication actually was a predictive factor that you learn just after? Do you actually follow up and see, is it causal? Is it because of the communication, or is that the indicator? What is the mechanism behind it? We can probably all make guesses, but I'm sure this is a source for further research. How much do you have the resources to do that?
Well, the honest answer is we do not have the resources because this is a fascinating field. The more we study it, the less we know. But if you look at the time periods, I left Deloitte Consulting, which was my last professional job, in 2002. And since then, I have been studying this. And a project usually lasts between 4 and 6 years. So we are very patient. And you have to look over time how things develop. And is it causal or not? I don't know. But observing it over time and always trying to have a control group, which doesn't have that experimental condition, we are doing our best. Thanks.
Maria first.
Thank you very much. Indeed, you referred to 2 Millennium Technology Prize winners, as you very well know, Tim Berners-Lee and Linus Torvalds. But what I wanted to say is I would propose that you add one key ingredient into your set, and this would be diversity. Would you agree that diversity increases collective intelligence? And of course, here we are talking about age, gender, career, competencies, national background, cultural background?
Absolutely, but not too much. If you have too much diversity, it doesn't. So we have studied diversity a lot, mostly in experimental settings where we have student groups. And it turns out that if you have too much, for example, ethnicity mix, they don't speak the right language anymore. At MIT, in a class, it can easily happen. I'm in great company, meaning there is no American in the team. There is just people born outside the US of all skin colors. And so we are struggling sometimes to find, and I teach this great class with Alto, and then I have Finnish students, and I have MIT students born in Arab countries and in African countries, and they have very different understandings of times. Too much diversity. However, if you have people with diverse friends, that's perfect.
So you can fine-tune the diversity. Yeah, please. Please use the microphone. In between the chairs, so I can see it.
Yeah.
There, and press once. Yeah.
I just have to bring up, Peter, the study by Tom Malone, who directs the Center for Collective Intelligence, that the number of women in the group increases the collective intelligence of the group.
True.
Yes, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, very true.
Any more questions, comments? The floor is open. We have a few more minutes before we start the panel. Yes? Please introduce yourself.
Good to see you all. My name is Ulf Kruse from Chamber Business Networks. Thanks for a great speech. I have a question about the first follower in your video here. There is a discussion between the innovator and the entrepreneur, and very often the entrepreneur steals the idea from the innovator and profits from it. So I believe that companies like Red Hat made a lot more money, if you put it on that axis, than Linus did on Linux. So have you measured what happens then after the innovators actually created the World Wide Web? Who profits from it? Who is the first? Or is it the second follower? Or is it the guy actually standing by selling tickets to the next event? Or?
Well, I think what you raised an entire list of big questions. The first one is motivation, because you have the motivational pyramid: money, power, glory, love what you are doing. If you look at Red Hat founders, and they actually gave Linus Torvalds a few $1 million of shares because they were recognizing that they were commercializing his innovation. And he seems to be a really happy person. So if you take everything together, I think he got his reward. And in the web, I also observed a parallel, because there is a famous paper, As We Might Think, by Vannevar Bush in 1935. So the web has had many precursors, but Tim is just a really collaborative person. There was another person, Ted Nelson, who is totally non-collaborative but super creative. He never got the thing off the ground. So the personality. And if you have an entrepreneur who is like Mark Zuckerberg and he has enabled a lot of people left and right, and they have, or Google is, they made a lot of, I mean, the two founding guys are still the richest ones, but they are at the same time innovators and entrepreneurs. Nothing wrong with that at all. And stealing ideas and sharing them, it all goes together. But we could talk about that for hours.
So with that, we have to thank Peter. I think we give him another hand. Thank you. And with that, I would like to invite the first panel. Charlotte Brogren is unfortunately homesick in bed, but we have good news. Marie Wall, also senior manager at Vinnova, and also an IFG member here at IVA, the leadership program, very recognized program. Mr. Leif Johansson, who we've seen before here, Maria Makarov from TAF, who also like to welcome, and Sala Massour, who's the vice president and head of the famous Ericsson Research Lab. And the moderator will be also someone who is seen on stage before, Randall Wright. Please, Randall.
Thank you. All right. Okay, are we on?
You may need to, yes.
Did I do the right thing? Okay. Well, welcome to all of you being a part of the panel today. And I thought what might be good is to start out, if each of you could just give a little description of your organization, your role in the organization, before we start the question and answers in the panel activity. And Sarah, I'm going to start with you to just ask, to tell us a little about your work with... Is that better? Okay, I got it. So that we can learn more about your responsibilities are at Ericsson.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Sara Basser, and I'm the head of research in Ericsson, which means that I'm responsible for research globally in Ericsson, and of course a large part of the innovation in Ericsson actually comes out of Ericsson research. Ericsson as a company, as I'm sure many of you know, is a very old company. We are 140 years old. We are also a global company, which means that we are present in basically all of the countries in the world. And I would claim that we are a company that has been very successful in innovation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. So we usually say that Ericsson typically transforms itself or reinvents itself maybe every 10 years. And we have also been part of bringing innovation to people, to business and society, that really have changed how we live, how we work, like mobile communication, mobile broadband, access to internet, and so on. And in doing that, we have also been very successful with always being the first to show new technology. So how have we managed to do that? Well, first of all, Ericsson has been very good at investing early in technology evolution and research, and protecting that investment. And it's a long-term thing. Sometimes we invest more than 10 years before our technology actually becomes commercial. And that has then enabled us both to be first, but also to have the largest patent portfolio in our industry of more than 37,000 patents, which is quite impressive. Working in a big company with innovation is, of course, challenging, and especially when you have a legacy business, a fairly large legacy business, and a lot of existing customers. So what we try to do in Ericsson is that we have to manage kind of dual ecosystem. One ecosystem where we actually work with our existing products, existing technology, we do incremental innovation, and we bring that out to our customers. But at the same time, we have to have a system where we capture new ideas that do not directly perhaps fit into the customers or the business we have today, and we try to nurture them to see if they can be potential new businesses for Ericsson. So two things that we have done that I think have been very successful in Ericsson traditionally is invest early in new technology and research, and also try to, when we find things that are new to us, try to protect them. It can be in the shape of an incubator or in something else, to keep them from competing with the existing business until they have grown to a certain size where they can actually compete. And to us, that has been a good way of working until now, but we are living in a very rapidly changing environment, which means that we constantly have to adapt and change And there I found the presentations today extremely interesting because they brought a lot of new insights to me on how we need to change for the future to continue to be successful and exist for another 140 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Maria?
Thank you very much. So I'm here in the capacity of chair of the board of Technology Academy of Finland. As you heard, my background is in academia. I'm professor of molecular biology, former vice president of the University of Helsinki. After that task, I worked for 4 years in Strasbourg, France, in the umbrella organization of the funding agencies in Europe for fundamental research, which was the European Science Foundation. Now I'm vice president of the Academy of Finland. This is not an academy. This is a public funding agency for fundamental research. It is the sister organization of Vetenskapsrådet. So I have been very much involved in the renovation of the university system in Finland. Before 2010, we had an old-fashioned university system, and I just mention one element, and you will immediately understand what it means. The rector was elected by staff. Okay? So we had a change of legislation, a total renovation, much more autonomy on all aspects of university leadership, down to finances, HR, policies, etc. I was sitting in the Prime Minister's Council for Research and Innovation, which designed the university renovation, and thereafter I was vice chair of the board of the Aalto University, which the board kicked off during the first 4 years, an entire new university. And the working name of this university was the Innovation University. Now we don't use that word anymore because it catalyzes envy in the country. So I've been living through the sort of political, strategic design of the renovation and also implementation in the context of Aalto. And now we really have the big ambition and the very, very strong need in the country to have the universities, we have too many still of them, 14, to really be part of this research and innovation ecosystem in the country, to really contribute to the growth of the country and sort of make their share what comes now to the main issues that we are here discussing, innovation for the benefit of our society and mankind.
Thank you. And Maria,
yes.
I'll ask you as well to give us some background. You're with Vinnova, I believe.
I'm with Vinnova.
Yes.
And Vinnova is a governmental agency that has as a task to stimulate, connect, and catalyze change in the innovation system and growth in all companies in Sweden. And we do that by promoting research within large companies, collaboration especially, collaboration between different actors in the system. And it's both large and small companies and the universities. And one of the most important is really to get those actors together, to see how we together from different perspectives can create a better Sweden.
And Bjorn, I know we know something about IVA, but perhaps you could tell us more about the organization and your role with that.
Well, obviously my most important role is chairman of IVA today. And we talked a little about the IVA organization. Otherwise, my whole life has been in industry. Started out at engineering school, and as I said this morning, started with really running small startups. Some beautiful experience and some very painful experiences there. But then I ventured into large corporations, Electrolux, Volvo, now Ericsson, chairman of Ericsson, you've heard about Ericsson, but I'm also chairman of AstraZeneca. And it's interesting to note that over that time, I'm now back into, as an investor also, into small companies. But on top of that, the work in the large companies have changed in such a way that we are now much more interested in interacting with small and medium-sized companies than we used to be when I started. And I think that's a sign of good progress among large companies, but also among small and medium-sized companies.
Yeah, Bjorn, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to ask all of you the same questions, just for your initial reactions or reflections on the presentations you heard today from Michael and from Peter, and just some general observations that maybe we can start the audience thinking.
Yeah, I think on Mike's presentation, He had this slide of culture eats strategy every day. I certainly believe that's true, and I've worked a lot in the companies where I've been involved in on strategy formulation, etc., which is what you call business model, but then also organizational structure versus culture. I think typically large corporations have too much reliance on structure and too little on culture. And how do you actually, when you don't like the culture that you're in, when people tell you what you cannot do because it's in the wall in the cultures, what do you actually do then? Most large companies typically have responded by trying to change structure and then let culture follow that structure. To my mind, you can say that's proven much too slow. Therefore, I'm very intrigued from Mike's presentation here on how do you actually change a culture that you don't like? When the culture is no longer serving your company's best, how do you actually change that without having to reorganize the whole structure to do that? Then I think on Peter's presentation from my point of view, first of all, it would be very interesting to run Peter's programs on all our colleagues at AstraZeneca and even IVA perhaps, and sort out where we have the real brilliant centers of innovation, potential innovation. But I think what you really bring home here is the ability to interact with an outside world, and even if that outside world is not particularly predictable or even, you can say, analytically easy to see what is really out there, but open up anyway. I have a couple of examples on that I can take on later, of when we are trying to do that in the pharmaceutical industry by creating what we call a hub of ventures, where we are allowing small companies, young people to come in to use our facilities and our labs in such a way that we end up with tying connections. But these are not business agreements. These are just the fact that we are in the same place and that we can use each other's resources. Very interesting, I think, in that sense.
Maria?
Yeah, my first take and one of the more important messages was really the mindset of going from R&D to experimentation and scale. Because I think that is so crucial, and that's something that we really push from Vinnova as well. And to change that attitude, you said something that organizations, larger organizations, have a tendency to not test a hypothesis, rather prove it. And I think that's dangerous. And we see a huge opportunity, and it's the same thing here, to change the culture. And we see a huge opportunity to really partner with smaller companies, because smaller entrepreneurial companies have more of this experimentational and scale in their DNA. And if we can use this dynamic and create an environment where we have a closer collaboration, I think that can be a change, something that can change the culture in the larger companies as well, and a very important thing to do in the future.
Maria?
Both of the speakers focused on the individual, I think, the potential and brilliance of individuals when they have the opportunity to really express their talent. Also, you alluded to self-assembly, Peter, and how to capture then the potential benefits of self-assembly, but then how to connect the individual potential to organizations. I think that, well, we all know that the most successful researchers, I mean, that's where in research groups where this concept is realized and has always been realized. You have the initiator and then you have the follower, as we saw in your video, and then you have this creative group where all of the members complement each other.
Sarah?
Yes, first of all, Michael, I thought it was extremely interesting how you talked about the shift from R&D to experiment and scale. And since we as a company have moved from being a very hardware-centric company to now being more centered on software and services, that actually gives us much more opportunities. So of course, we do prototyping together with customers. We also know that when we develop things and we have a lead customer that we are connecting with early, that is normally a very good success factor. But moving more into the software paradigm, we can do even more things, like move more towards DevOps, where we actually develop, operate, and continuously improve software at the same time. So I found that extremely interesting. And of course, it is a culture shift for us, but also we have to change as well as being big companies if we want to be successful in a longer time frame. That was extremely interesting. Peter, your presentation, how you describe how we can work in teams and how you also have a very good method of actually measuring and being able to track how the teams are working. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, we know from experience that innovation very often occurs when we meet across boundaries. We meet new people that we normally don't work with, but how you actually can track that and also see how are the leaders. And then as a leader, I thought about this, you have to take care of the first follower. And I have a clear example of that. I had a presentation in my team of a new innovation. And as soon as the team, they presented the idea, one of my key technical leaders, one of our senior experts in Ericsson said, wow, this is the coolest thing I've seen. And then everyone agreed. So he was the first follower, and then everyone followed, and we turned that into a product very quickly.
One of the areas that I think came up last night as I was talking to many of you is that Sweden depends mainly on exports. It's a high technology country, but it's a smaller country. It has to compete with Silicon Valley. It has to compete with China. How are you benchmarking yourselves against innovation efforts in other parts of the world? Maria, I'm going to put you on the hot seat first to maybe address that.
How we benchmark, we are following what's happening in the Swedish industry all the time, but it's very, very difficult because it's difficult to measure innovation. Mm-hmm. So the best way to measure this is really through the success of companies. But I think that there are a lot of other measurements out there, the innovation indexes that some put Sweden in the top, some puts them in the bottom. Mm-hmm. So you can't really trust them. You have to make your own assumption. But it's difficult. But of course we are out there looking all the time and seeing and learning from researchers as you, and trying to see, okay, how does it work in US, how does it work in Germany, what can we learn? And then we try to stimulate and talk about what's happening in other places with all our customers, that is companies, and to stimulate them to change, learn.
Sarah, what would you say for that for Ericsson?
Well, if we talk about benchmarking innovation, I think it's important that we view innovation in a broad sense. So it's not only technology products, it can also be ways of working, it can be processes, it can be business models, and it can also actually be something something that already exists, but in a new way that is still innovation. What I see is that sometimes we tend to underestimate the innovation that is done in large companies compared to only looking at startups, and I think that is dangerous. We need to view all innovation that is done both in small and big companies together, and how we actually can get that total ecosystem to be very innovative. And also there's a tendency to focus only on innovation in applications that maybe can run on a quicker time scale, whereas we also have to consider the innovation in the infrastructure that also lies behind all of these applications. Of course, we are benchmarking in terms of patents, but that is not exactly innovation, it's more technical invention. Right. But it's important to consider the broad scale of innovation and also both applications, but also the more long-term infrastructure innovation.
And Maria?
Can I change your question into what has worked in Finland?
You know what? I'm gonna let you do that after I ask Bjorn, and we'll segue. Is that good?
Okay. Yes.
All right. I think in Sweden you have to divide that question into two. I think we have a number of global companies that are actually doing quite well. We are the most globalized per capita country in the world. And they are, of course, measuring their innovation pace with how well they are doing in their competitive different segments. What we have, which is brilliantly new and very good, is that we also now have a new startup generation of young people. When I went to university, 10% of us were saying that we would like to do our own company. 60% nowadays say they would like to do their own company. And Sweden has dramatically changed their rules on how you can run your own startup company, from really provocatively negative in running your own company into being actually, some people would say, provocatively positive, in the sense of fortune tax inheritance tax, many different barriers that have been taken away. And that means that we actually have a startup generation of very innovative people. Now, if you combine the two, then you come into something which becomes really competitively strong. On this issue, whether Sweden is a small country, Sweden is certainly a small country. But when were we not a small country? So I think we can say this is what we have. This is what we need to do, work with what we have. And my basic feeling is that we can be very optimistic.
Yes. And Maya, I'm going to let you reframe my question there.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that in Finland, the change of mindset of not being courageous enough to start your own company to being courageous and do that has been more difficult and more slow. And only after the fall of mobile Nokia has this culture been advanced. And those of you who have visited Slush can maybe experience, but this is the very young generation. I have asked the chair if I can show a slide to describe what has worked in Finland and what is not anymore working.
Johan would know how to work that slide. If
One slide.
Here we go.
Yeah, okay. So what worked in Finland very well since the beginning of the 90s is as follows. We have here a higher education, which is of course funded by public money, and this yields the fantastic researchers who come up with findings that can then be turned into innovation and business. And here of course we are talking about private resources. So when society gets here, benefits, jobs, tax revenues, etc., then the policymakers are willing to fund this part of the knowledge triangle. And this worked for more than 15 years. And we were at the top ranks of competitiveness, etc., and we also were one of the world's most effective investor of both public and private funds into R&D. Okay, now this is changing. Our government, for the first time, we have a government which does not trust that investing here in higher education and research will be turned into growth of the economy. This has been stated very clearly by our current government, and we are now experiencing very important cuts in the budgets of the universities, in the fundamental research funding, and in innovation. Tekes has such slashes in its budget that it's incredible. And now we are in a situation, you asked in the program for Nordic examples, where we really have to see new ways of managing innovation, and we desperately need collaboration between the actors, between the private and the public sector, between universities and the companies.
Maria, you had a comment on that.
I have a comment, because this is a model that we have been working according to in Sweden for a long time as well. But what we in Sweden also have seen is really that this is a quite a push model, as I understand it. And we see a strength in really changing the direction, to really start with the challenges that we have to solve to create a better world. And those challenges that we would like to address are really challenges that cannot be addressed by one company or by one organization. So we would rather, as a complement to this model, start with what kind of innovation, what do we want our customers to be? And then based on that, go back and see what kind of research do we need, what kind of education do we need. So we believe, and we have a strong feeling that that is a stronger model that can really create a larger amount of change and transformative change.
Yes, I don't know, Bjorn, if you had any comments. I saw you writing notes, so I was wondering.
No, I was. We have this idea on how does innovation actually happen, and obviously there is demand-driven legislation or innovation, where you sort of back into what do we need to know to be able to fulfill this need. But I think in general it's more like a cloud of activities where ideas happen at any point. If you look back into history, you say we have this innovation now because we had this research. In reality, what happened was that it's very often happening along the lines and almost in a three-dimensional figure. So it is more difficult to predict. That doesn't mean that you cannot ask for innovation or ask for reasons. We have a swarm of climate changes, I think, right now coming together to act in an intelligent way and asking for innovation. But in reality, if you look at much innovation, you don't know where it's coming from the beginning, and no one predicted it.
Yes. And Sarah, do you have any comments you'd like to add?
I have a few comments. I completely agree with you, Leif, that innovation is not predictable. But what I can say is that a success factor for Ericsson has been that we have access to very good competence in Sweden, both from on the master's level, but also on the PhD level. So that is kind of supporting your model, and also that we have a very good exchange between industry and academia, where we work together and we have people moving back and forth. So that is a model that has been very successful for us.
Well, I don't want to be the only person asking questions, so I'd like to ask if there are questions that we might have from you for our panelists. And if you can just raise your hand. If not, I have more questions. But would anyone have questions or like to inquire of our panelists? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Helena Börjesson. I'm from Elekta. I was a bit curious about your experience with this trend of inviting these small, maybe smaller than swarms even, groups of innovators and so on into larger companies in terms of innovation competitions. You mentioned that you share facilities and so on, but even more actively inviting for innovation competitions in the industrial environment and trying to make something out of that, a success and a product in the end.
Is it a question for me or?
We can start with you, Sarah, and we'll go through to the others.
What we saw was that we needed a good mechanism to do that, and we actually have started something that we call the Ericsson Garage, and that is it's both a physical place, but it is a structure where we can bring in partners, mainly smaller companies, and work together on new innovative ideas. And it is a technology incubator, so what we do is actually taking it from being an idea into building a minimum viable product together with small companies. And that is fairly new to us, but it has worked very well. So we plan to continue with that.
Well, let me take a shot. I think we can say we have large companies to open up and do well and to be innovative and creative in the sense of using resources outside. We really have two big places to go. One is small startups and industrialists who are small companies. The other side is academia. I think in general, in academia, frankly, it's become more difficult in Sweden. We have tended to formalize the relationship with academia in such a way, formalize and to some extent bureaucratize the relationships in such a way that it's more difficult now than it used to be. You can say that it was so informal in the used to be that it might have been too informal. On the small and medium-sized companies, I think what we have learned is that we tended to formalize the arrangements too early. So a small company sits down with a very large company, and you try to preempt and write into an agreement everything that can happen down the road, and you usually end up not getting any place. Or you get the small company a feeling that the big one is trying to run across it, you can say, big elephant trying to run across a small mouse. So I think what we have tried to do as large companies to sort of back away from that and say, let's start just to get to know each other. Let's see how this can work out. Let's see if we can actually use each other's resources in a constructive way. Then somewhere down the road, we should actually sit down and make a negotiation, perhaps, and see whether we can do it. So back away from trying to solve all problems immediately, which is, by the way, I think a good notion for academia relationships too.
Maria?
Yeah, I have a short comment that this is an area where we have been looking very much on what's happening in other countries and how other countries' companies are doing, especially in the United States, because in the United States we have a lot of companies that are born from the entrepreneurial startup community, so they have a different culture than our Swedish companies in general. And one success factor that we have seen that is very good as a takeaway is that you need to have someone within your organization that understands deeply the startup's reality and understands deeply the big corporation, that can really translate between those two cultures, because there will be really hard disappointments from both sides otherwise. So you really need to have someone there that is trusted by both sides and have a deep understanding.
Maria?
What you suggest can be realized in universities between students as well. So what Aalto did was to give students space and equipment, infrastructure that they wanted to have. And these are called saunas, also garages. And so, and the message was, there, go, it's yours, do what you want. Nobody controls, nobody asks. And a number of startup companies have been created by students in these particular environments where they have total freedom, and also the slush concept, for those of you who may not know, this is an annual conference of startups. It's called Slush because Helsinki is slush in November. And this event has grown from, they started with 200 participants, and now last time they had 15,000 participants, so young startup people.
Very good.
Other questions from the Academy? Yes, sir.
So my name is Jacob de Geer. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called iSettle. This is a question for Sarah. You mentioned that Ericsson is transforming every 10 years. Was that correctly understood? To a certain extent,
yes,
obviously.
Yes.
So my question to you is, do you think, I mean, obviously that's a pretty fast pace of transformation given the size of your company, but is it fast enough given the sort of the world around you and what's happening?
For the future, no. No, it will only go faster, 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 faster.
So how will you kind of keep up?
Yeah, that's why I found it so interesting also with the two presentations. We have a concept that has been fairly successful up to now. Now we need to change, because I'm not sure what we have now will be exactly what would make us win in the future, since things are happening quicker.
But
thanks.
Could I add a perspective to
Yes.
that, which is Ericsson unique? You know, Ericsson is a fantastic company that have served telephone operators over a very long while, so closely that I don't think we need even data to share. We know the customers in such a good way over decades. The trouble is not whether we know our present customer base in the right way. The real issue is, will our present customer base, telephone operators, will be the future network builders? And in reality, what's happening is that some of them will be, many of them will not be. And therefore, the whole of the challenge with Ericsson right now is to use the skills that we have, the technology that Sarah is providing, but to actually roll that out to other customer bases than what we used to be. And that's a big cultural change.
Yes, and
Right.
can I just comment on that? Leif is absolutely right. And what we see now is that we have a segment that we call industry and society that is growing, and growing quickly within Ericsson, and that is a different type of business compared to what we had previously.
Michael?
Right, because this is compounded by the notion of a switch versus a data farm. They're blurring. All these things are blurring. My question is sort of around the unit of analysis for innovation. I was doing I'd come up with a I thought, very interesting product idea. And the person I was talking with said, it's a great product idea, let's do a company. But I didn't want to do a company, I wanted to do a product. And developing a product or developing an innovation is different than developing an innovative company. So the commercialization, the commercialization is baked in. The other, it's a product or a service that maybe can be integrated or sold or licensed to an established company or another. So in the ecosystem that exists in Sweden and in Finland, and you're talking about all of these students who want to become entrepreneurs, do they really want to become entrepreneurs, or do they want to invent new things? Where does one draw the line in an ecosystem between something that should be a new product or a new service versus something that should be a new company?
Bjorn?
Yeah, no. First of all, you're pointing to all of the. We sometimes think about small and medium-sized companies as one innovative entrepreneur who have an idea willing to die and passionately go for that. That probably is the simplest relationship that one can have with small and medium-sized companies. But instead you actually have a whole range of ideas that comes at you in a large corporation. Many of them coming from inside or close to inside or academia, etc. And as you know, the problem usually is not in the beginning of those phases, because you can pick that up. The problem is 10 years afterwards, when all of that has become a success. Right. What do you then do in terms of remuneration for the person who came up with that original idea? If you look at all the skunk works, romantic tales telling, you can say, many of them are on the negative side, saying, I came up with this beautiful idea, and then this company did wonderfully well with it, but they never paid me appropriately. And the question, of course, should you pay afterwards? How should you deal with that? And there are lots of questions there, like how are we actually an attractive company? Are we an attractive company if it comes up that 10 years after we had a good idea being put in, we don't pay anyone, even though that actually worked well? Are we contractually bound to do it? No. But is it a good thing to do, to be an attractive place where ideas can be loaded in? Lots of issues around there that at best, you can say, are difficult and sometimes prohibitive in actually bringing up ideas. So it's the area that we can work much more with.
But,
please.
But in Sweden, we have financing for that kind of ideas, especially if they are arriving from academia or from students. Because we have, from our perspective, financing innovation, we don't want entrepreneurs and innovators to create a company too early, because you don't even know which kind of competences you need, or you don't even know if this is something that can really bear a company. So these innovation offices that we have within universities, they have a stack of money that they can use to really validate and verify ideas, to, when they know more about the potential, can decide if this is going to be a company, if this is going to be licensed to another company, or if this is going to be some knowledge that can go into further research.
So the universities, you think, are doing that aspect well?
Yeah, they are doing that aspects well, and this is quite a new concept, so they are still evolving and learning. But that is for ideas that comes from academia, and the incubators have a similar role for ideas from the public.
Other questions? We have one in the back. I'm sorry.
I think it's actually about different personalities. I mean, most of the people that work in my organization, they do not want to start a company, but they love technology and they love creating new things. And I guess that was also true for Linus Torvald. He didn't want to start a company. And we also see some young people start companies, others prefer to work in an open source environment where they contribute actively to open source, building new technology, basis for new products without starting companies. So I think it goes down to the basic personality of how you are as a person.
Well, just a quick follow-up. That was something IBM did well with open source. Nobody would have picked IBM as being a champion of open source with Apache, but they ended up doing very well. But that was a big cultural shift for them. Do you find that same situation at Ericsson, that because you have a 37,000 patent portfolio, that being open is much more difficult for your argument?
We do both. We contribute actively to open source as well, and we release a lot of the software that we develop as open source as well. So we do both.
We have a question in the back.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jon Haag with Billerud Korsnäs. My question is, there was a very good quote from Mike this morning, which is, the greatest innovation frustration is not technical or financial, it's organization and culture, and maybe then I would add experimentation as well. So my question then to the panel, from a large corporation perspective or from a Sweden-Finland perspective, how do you see that the big corporations still are giving large dividends, meaning we don't know what to do with the money, to someone else, rather than then starting to invest in organization, culture, and experimentation?
Leif?
Sure. I think you have two systems working against each other here. On the shorter term, you have when you put the company into the stock exchange, you're actually saying if you bring in shareholders' money from the beginning, or if you have traded in shareholders over time, you're actually telling them that you invest in our company and we will give you reasonable payback on your investments. Now, there are two ways to do that. One is to spend shareholders' money, if you want to put it like that. Shareholders sometimes do. You spend it in research and innovation. You spend more money with Sarah, you spend more money with the research departments of AstraZeneca, and they in turn perhaps coordinate well with the outside world. But in reality, the promise to the investor who does that is that you should give money back to him or her in such a way that it's a meaningful investment. The other way to do that is, of course, to lower your cost and over time give dividend back even though your company is not growing. So you have, as a business leader, you have two choices to provide better shareholder returns. One is to go with completely new stuff, be open up, organizationally strong, and end up in a good way where you spend shareholders' money the way they look at it in research and new products, or you actually lower cost and you over time diminish the company, make the company smaller. Different shareholders have different investment themes, and sometimes what you read in media are the shorter term investment themes, because that's what fits media to print. Media is, in absolutely now, what is in the news right now, and then what usually it's in the news right now is someone aggressively on the shorter side of that argument saying we really should have more money back in the next quarter, while the longer term suits media less well. So as a business leader, you have to understand that that's what's going on, such that you don't lose yourself completely into what's written in the shorter term argument of that whole exercise. Many more cynical shareholders would suggest to you, if you're in a business, that for you to really invest into something completely different is usually a waste of money from shareholders' point of view. I would argue that there are many examples of where that's worked wonderfully well. But many shareholders will say, we bought you because you were a pharmaceutical company, so why are you now making medical devices? The whole investment theme why we acquired your share was pharmaceuticals. Why are you now making medical devices or other things like that? So but it's a whole range of ideas that comes at you from, and I think one of the real important, we sometimes talk about the market, financial market in singularis. We say there is a market and they decided that. In reality, that market is just the average of lots of a very, very wide investor groups. And you have, as a business person, you have to listen to that variety rather than the singularity, the single market.
Well, our time is up, and I want to thank you, Leif, and I want to thank Maria, and Sarah for your contributions. And I think we're on to our next panel, Bjorn.
Yes. So I think we give the panel a hand. So we have Randall staying, and then I would like to invite our second and also last panel, who will make sense of everything now. And it will be Peter and Michael, who we've seen giving speeches, and then Jacob de Geer, CEO of iSettle, and Tero Ojanpere, who's a managing partner and co-founder at Vision Plus Management in Finland. So,
great. Okay.
How are you? Hello. How are you? Good to see you again. Good to see you. Hello. Appreciate my question.
Yeah, I'd like to start out again just to ask Tero and also, is it Jacob or Jakob? Jacob?
Jacob is fine.
Okay,
and Jacob. Perfect.
If you could tell us about your roles and your companies, just so that everyone in the audience is familiar with you.
Okay, very good. Maybe I start. So I'm from Finland and running a venture capital fund, investing into startups, quite early stage, and also in the spirit of the discussion whether we invest into companies, we are also investing into products. Product can be here a patent that we help to license out from a big corporation or smaller corporations or a top-level domain so we develop a somewhat unique investment method, which I term a revenue share investment. We have invested into 60 companies in the last 4 years. Before that, I was worked for Nokia for the until I became adult, that is 21 years. And from the researcher into executive board as a CTO and head of the research, and all of my life I have been dealing with innovation also in Nokia, sort of the building new products, etc. And I think we come back to that later about having seen the rise of the big company and success of the innovation, but I also participated in the sort of the destruction of a lot of value in the end, but not to the very end and not to the new rise. So I left 5 years ago from Nokia. And I'm also in the chairman of the board of the largest technical university of Finland, the Tampere University of Technology.
Jacob?
So I currently run a company. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called iSettle, and it's best described as the European equivalent to Square, run by Jack Dorsey in the US. We started the company back in 2010, currently 250, 270 employees across 12 markets. So Europe is our kind of core market, and then we have Mexico and Brazil as well, just to top things up. And primarily what we do is mobile payments and acceptance. Looking from a disruption point of view, what makes the company interesting is really how we transform financial services in a way that is more sort of suitable and applicable for the newer market, if you like. How we onboard customers and merchants in a more efficient way, and how we can deal with smaller types of businesses and make them profitable given the effectiveness and efficiency that the new technology gives us.
But you're not really a payments company, you're a payments ecosystem company.
Yeah, I think that's a better description, probably.
And maybe, Jacob, you could start by giving us some idea about, I know Peter talked about how companies start innovation. Does your experience sort of parallel that or fit in with what Peter was talking about?
Yeah, it does from certain aspects, but I guess innovations is the way innovation works is pretty different from different markets and cultures. I would assume. I mean, looking at the Swedish market, for example, I think we have a pretty unique situation over here, especially when it comes to corporate culture, but also when it comes to innovation. And maybe it's not so unique, and maybe you can answer my hypothesis here. But Swedes, and especially the younger generation, is extremely secular in its way of looking at things, and we have sort of the highest degree of secular rational values in the world. I saw some information around that, in combination with the fact that younger people in Sweden tend to love, self-expression and sort of top rank among self-expression values around the world as well, which makes them a pretty kind of complex and unique breed if you look at across the entire world. Because effectively what it means is that they don't listen to any kind of authority. They don't believe in God, they don't believe in authority, and they don't believe in their parents. Right? So, and second to that, the only thing that actually motivates them is if they can self-express themselves. So as a leader, it becomes very complex to motivate people and say that we're all marching in this direction because of this and that, unless people actually do believe in that vision and mission. So the combination of those two makes Sweden pretty complex from a corporate cultural perspective, and how to build a culture in a new company. It becomes even more complex in a company such as Ericsson, and transforming that company into a more modern company from a cultural perspective. Would be interesting to hear your views.
Well, I have a couple of friends. Some of them are more tongue-in-cheek than constructive. But the constructive one, and I mean this rather seriously, and I'm an American, I make no presumption as to Swedish culture, so relying purely on the way you're describing it, that's a wonderful recipe for a bespoke, small business model, but it can't scale.
No.
That doesn't scale. Ego doesn't scale in that way. You can, and I will do a pop culture thing that does scale, like ABBA, your music industry. You're producing content that scales, but the creative unit doesn't scale. That's going to be the small team. So you use technology to scale the output, not the enterprise. And so that would be my bet, that you would have a lot of niche niche creatives, but the enterprise, but you're not going to get an Ericsson or an AstraZeneca out of that. You're not going to get an organization of thousands of people. You'll get an organization of dozens of people that, because of the global reach of networks, can become large enterprises. In the interest of fairness, we have the same situation in California now and in Cambridge, which is the goal is not to hire lots of people, it's to hire the right people and have partnerships and use networks to scale appropriately. So the whole notion of what it means to scale enterprise is very different. I think we're entering an era where organizations of thousands of, there will be more organizations of hundreds of people than of thousands of people.
And I completely agree. The question is whether you try to change the mindset of an entire generation, or if you just try to find the type of people within that generation that can actually, follow orders.
Because, and I hope that you will agree with me on this, Tero, because I've been a teacher of students for a couple of decades now, I have given up all hope of trying to change people's minds. So I actually, and this I'll be very serious about, I believe that it is increasingly the role of teachers and managers to put smart people or people who wish to be smart in a position to change their own minds. How do you put people in a position to change their own minds? I think that is a different design challenge than how do I change your mind?
Peter, I think, does your research support that, or do you find that in the organizations you're studying now?
Well, actually, I think it's not even research, but also my own experience, my own kids, and being a Swiss transplanted into American society. I found it interesting, Michael's perspective and Peter's perspective. For example, the question of scalability, do we need it? That's what I'm coming from a small country which is very self-organizing and autonomous, and then you have the just sort of, it's not even a question, it's just you need to have perpetual growth and a free market economy, and it's basically good. This is what I experience at Sloan as the premise, and coming from Switzerland, I'm just critical to start with that regard. And if I look at my own professional life, working at a very big organization for 3 years, it was my unhappiest 3 years really at UBS. But I learned a huge amount about large organizations and how I didn't want to spend the rest of my life. And since then, having the self-organizing, self-emergent behavior with the young people that you are describing and how you do that, and then I'm back to Michael and agreeing with him, I don't think we need managers anymore. We need enablers, and they need to. You need to just waken up your students and let them take over and make their own minds and their own decisions.
Tero, do you find the same experience in Finland as in Sweden, or?
I think Finland is changing quite radically. If you look at the sort of the younger generation, and this when I actually did my studies and went to work, I think the only sort of the path was that you work for a big corporation, and that was kind of, you went there and innovated. And when I joined Nokia, it was a rubber boot company that turned out into a cell phone company. So we transformed kind of the company at the time. But now I think in the last, it's kind of interesting, and I don't know where it comes from, but the 5 years, within the last 5 years, I think the slush that was mentioned earlier by Maria is a manifestation of it. You see that young people say that entrepreneurship is an option or even desirable option as a career, and I think it kind of reflects a change in the society. But then on the scaling, actually, I was thinking about earlier about the big small company sort of versus small company and the notion of the scaling. I think it's how do you scale now? A company is very different than it was even 5 years ago, and I think that's because the world is more connected. The capabilities that you needed to build yourself earlier actually are now available off the shelf, so you can focus on your core innovation rather than trying to build the infrastructure. And I think that's why I find it kind of very interesting from the Mike's and Peter's earlier talks about the thinking about the culture, that when you think about big corporations, that I kind of my sort of the notion or term for the why big companies fail in renewing themselves was the old new paradigm, meaning that the old companies are so successful that when they see a new business model or a new product, they wonder that, okay, it's a small market, we can wait, and we'll go there when it is a big market, and that's too late. Or new competencies.
We'll buy the company.
We'll buy the company or something like that. Yeah. Or we need new competencies, it's going to cannibalize the market. And we've seen this from the music market from the day when the peer-to-peer music sharing emerged, being here in the Sweden, very topical thing. The response was to sue and actually sell more CDs. And then I think the problem with this cultural issue is actually kind of amplified by the fact that today, when you think about innovation and distributing it to hundreds of millions of people, you can do it with just submitting it to App Store. So distribution is available to anybody who innovates. The second is that with the cloud and other technologies, basically starting something that earlier required you to have a server farm and build the infrastructure, it's zero cost, and actually you can scale it infinitely. So in that sense, you can build a big company on demand. And I think those are kind of changing the way how innovation is happening and why big corporations will have even more difficult time in responding. It doesn't say that you cannot actually succeed in renewing the company. Like I think in case of Nokia, for example, I think doing reasonably good as an infrastructure company at the moment. I think there is always a way out, but I think it's becoming more difficult.
Just to still build on that, and I'm going to come back to culture in a minute, but you know, Michael, you know a lot of companies. Peter, you do, and I'm sure both of you, Jacob and Tero, have had experience at Nokia. Do you think large companies are aware of that? You know, they don't want to have a Kodak moment. Do you think they're aware that they have to be doing something than buying the company when it gets big enough? Do you see an awareness out there among large companies?
I think my immediate reaction is this ties into Leif's point. I was at a appropriately enough a Microsoft CEO event, and I won't name the banker. It's not a critical comment, but he was being asked about how he was responding to more activist investors, active shareholders, and it was becoming very contentious. And just to further name drop, Warren Buffett was in the audience. So ultimately, this very well-known banker said, ultimately, you get the investors you deserve. You know, and I don't know whether he said that as a cynic or as an idealist. So here you are, you have the investors you deserve. If you're a good venture-run company, and you know you have the investors, and as long as the venture capitalists think you're the right CEO, you're the CEO. When they think the company's outgrown you, you know, good luck to you. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Fair.
The flip side is you're not. What do you? So it's my bias, by the way, is not towards the investors. It's towards the customers. Customers don't care, may not care if you're a big company or a small company. So long as they get the experience they want, they're happy. But if you're running a publicly traded company, you are a two-sided market. If you make the investors happy and your customers think you suck, the investors that you've made happy, they're going to leave you once the returns stop, and vice versa. If you make the customers very happy, but the investors say, well, you're too nice to customers, give us dividends, or we'll go to somebody where the capital gains or the dividend. So you're in a pincer move. That's what I don't know is going to change. That's what I don't know is going to change. Will the rise of activism in public markets in a slower growth global economy lead to larger companies becoming more concerned with renewal or how to manage shrinkage better? I don't know. All I know for sure is that somebody besides me will get rich off the answer to that question. By the way, completely different. If the people were predicting higher growth rates, I would be more comfortable with the answer to that question. But if you believe, as established economic projections are, that we may be suffering from, quote, secular stagnation, the other kind of secular, then I do not know what a board is going to do under those circumstances, because there is no question that it is higher long-term risk to try to renew than to harvest. Sorry, long-winded.
And Tara, I think you had a comment to that.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for established cooperation is I find it very useful concept is what business are you in? And I think because you tend to look at the innovation as a company through the lenses where you are. So you have defined your business, you have your mission, you have your vision, you have your mission, and then you derive all the metrics. And I think the problem is very often that even if as an individual everybody in the company realizes that something is going wrong here, when you think about that, hey, all the middle management is incentivized to act in a certain way, so you are seeking for very often incremental innovation, while the competition, if you look at just the well-known examples of Uber, is it the competition for taxi in Finland? I think it's a much larger notion and the vision and so forth. Airbnb, the same thing. And in that sense, you kind of tend to react in a linear fashion when you should be thinking about in a completely in a disruptive way.
How hard was it for Nokia? You saw the iPhone. You guys had all the technologies. There was no technical barrier for you to do these. What was the cultural or organizational barrier?
Yeah. I think the key point is actually, it started, in my opinion, actually much earlier than iPhone, because if you look at a little bit of history, I call the dilemma, I name it actually a bill of material culture, because when you think about Nokia's success in the 90s with the phone and popularizing that one, it was the distribution, brand, and being able to produce cost, the phones with the least cost bill of material than anybody else of the world. We were always a cost leader, and that became kind of the mantra in the company, and all the incentives were there. So if you look at the history, it started already like with the color screens.
Right.
Nokia was half a year late.
Right.
And then became the mantra in the company, kind of the notion that it doesn't matter if you are late from the market, as long as we are there when the market is big. So it was exactly that. And then it went on the flip phones, and it was already 2002 when Nokia actually set up an organization that, hey, we have imaging phones, we have the music. So we see the smartphone coming, and Symbian was the first smartphone platform. But at the same time, I think it comes to these customer expectations. iPhone lifted them up in a way that how convenient. It doesn't need to have all the bells and whistles that the operator specified, as long as it does the one or few things very well. And that changed the game forever.
Questions from the audience so far? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Bjorn Stigs, and I'm a senior advisor at IVA. Sometimes, and I'm a former chief executive of a multinational company as well, it's not always possible to transform a company inside a company. And we have some very interesting examples now in certain industries, what is happening. If I take the example of the electricity utility industry, Germany now is a very interesting example. The biggest utility in Germany is E.ON. And with the transformation which is happening in Germany, E.ON concluded that they had two businesses with completely different business models. One was running the big centralized power stations, and one was building up the new renewables, smart grid, services, and so on. And the management concluded, and the board concluded, there is no way we can bridge the cultures of these two businesses. So we split the company, we put them both on the stock exchange. The central utility business, it's a cash flow business model. Let's run it as low cost as possible, no maintenance, no nothing, just milk it for cash as long as possible. And then we invest in a growth business in the other So sometimes you simply cannot transform a company. You have to realize that you've got more than one company. And then you basically, given the importance of human capital and what you say, that you then have to take the consequences and simply split it up.
You know, I being in the financial industry these days, I think it's a very relevant and interesting comment. I mean, what we see today in, you know, happening with banks, or rather not happening with banks, from my perspective, obviously, is, you know, to a certain extent what once upon a time happened in the music industry. They're all waiting, they're all in maintenance mode, if you like. They all employ, you know, engineers with cobalt engineering skills, which is not very relevant anymore. I mean, that's a fact. If you look at sort of the hiring skills that they're looking for is cobalt engineers, which is kind of scary in 2016. But I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's exactly what they should be doing.
It's like a utility.
Yeah. I mean, they should split up the company and start preparing for the next generation of banking. And that's what we're doing, but that's what they should be doing. So I think it's a very, very relevant comment. I think it's, to a certain extent, it's impossible to change the type of culture, much because of the skill set of the workers and people working in the company. Just looking at myself, I think already in my company, I'm getting a bit too old, quite frankly, to be as innovative as I used to be, because some of the things that the younger generation...
Come to MIT.
Absolutely. Some of the things that the younger generation see as kind of utility and scalable resources, I don't really understand. I mean, for me, sometimes Snapchat is a way of you know, showing yourself nude for 2 seconds. Apparently it's not, because it's a movement. But I mean, look around this room. I mean, most of the people in here could be sort of managers and running bigger companies. We're way too old. We need to change sort of the organizational structure fundamentally, and that's painful.
Yes, Tara.
I think you are still young in spirits. You sounded like my teenage boy when you said that don't believe in God, don't believe in the parents, and no authority respect. But anyway,
that was not me. I love everything.
I was going to actually make a comment about following on that one on the issue of policy making. Because I think that when you look, for example, EU regulation, I think it's supporting your argument in the financial industry, because banks are being more and more regulated, and that limits their room for movement. But if you then look at on the other side, EU is very much encouraging innovation in the financial sort of the industry and promoting companies like ISL, etc. I think it's like almost like that you are playing two games here, that regulate more, and on the other hand, encourage innovation that challenges the existing ones that are being stifled.
I beg to differ here, because I hear this comment a lot, and we're just as regulated as the banks. It's just that we are relying upon new technology and a different mindset on how to address the problems. And that's what I'm saying. I think it has to do with a sort of, I don't know, whether it's an age-driven mindset or whether it's just a mindset that comes from being too long within an organization. But we are just as regulated as the banks.
Do you have a bank license?
No, we don't, because we don't pay the octroi for you know, the 50 million. Apart from that, we are just as regulated. I don't think you want
to have actually a bank license, because if you would, you would be under much tighter regulation.
But I want to try to connect this, and this may be an irreconcilable cultural thing, but I don't think
it is a Finca.
It is. But you look at what's going on in China. You see, I'm going to say that, you know, red envelope companies, peer-to-peer payments. Whether you like it or not, you're not just in the payments ecosystem, you're in the peer-to-peer payment. You have to be able to facilitate that, or else you'll be subsumed in the stack. The problem, and I'm sure that there were different cultures and they were incompatible, and the decision to split was a fiduciarily responsible decision. But you look at an Amazon, large company, they're running a global IT infrastructure business. They're also running a retail business. Yeah. They're different businesses. There are different business models inherent. The bet, and it's the same kind of bet, it's comparable to the shareholder bet. The bet that Amazon is making is the data that we get from our customers. Google makes the same bet. Facebook is making the same bet. The data that we get and the analytics we are capable of running on that data will allow us to find efficiencies. I know this is the synergy argument done again, but the one thing I can say about this is we know whatever I predict about the future, else I predict about the future is wrong, but this I know. The cost of computation and the cost of analytics is going to continue, and communications is continue to go down. Okay? So that's the bet. Your organization wasn't prepared to make that bet, that there would be efficiencies because we will have the data to leverage the assets on this. I think that's the kind of question that all organizations are facing. If you are running an organization in 2016 and by 2020 you are managing 1,000 times, 3 orders of magnitude more data, how are you getting value from that with new products, services, user experiences? That's the issue. And the idea that you're going to use that simply to refine your existing business, that's nonsense. You're going to have to be able to be opportunistic. What does that look like? That's you from your school in Helsinki in Sweden. What will that look like? What kind of entrepreneurs are going to emerge, knowing that they're going to have that many more resources?
I don't know what are they going to emerge or what, but I think reflecting on what you said about the innovation in the building a new businesses. Right. I think one of the interesting ones is that why did Amazon actually go into the hosting business and building an infrastructure? Because they actually first they built the retail business and they developed the resources and then just realized that okay, this can be a business on its own. I think that's something that and when you look at now, for example, Apple, I think they are still they have been doing the same thing, but they also building capabilities like chipsets. Like there was a notion last 20 years in their telephone industry that actually you should not integrate vertically. You should actually chipset out, you outsource that one, etc. And they are going against the trend and innovating. Will they do a chipset business and start to sell them? I doubt, because their culture is a vertical integration. But I think that one should look at the assets in the companies and can you leverage in different way. We had an interesting discussion with the head of research from Ericsson earlier on a break that about big infrastructure companies. They went for managed services and they are operating actually networks like the operators used to do. The next step is that are you utilizing the data, like referring to the earlier, in your developing your infrastructure products?
Right.
And today the answer is that no. So there is a lot of room for improvement.
But the one thing, and forgive me for going on at this, the thing that I urge the people in this room to consider is your assets are your customers. Look to your customers as an asset. That's what Amazon has done well. That's what Apple has done well with iTunes and the App Store. That's what payment company. That's what Square did well, and it's one of the reasons why Jack was brought back for Twitter.
Sure.
You know.
Question in the back.
My name is Henrik Perlmutter. I have a question to Michael about your ideas on scalability. My question is, isn't it intrinsic in every product or service whether it is scalable or not? I mean, music will always be scalable, and Jacob's iSettle will also be scalable if there are enough customers out there wanting to use it.
On one dimension, that's a fair statement. On another dimension, I want to make explicit what you've kept implicit and concealed, which is what are the economics of scalability? We'll give you a really good example here. We were talking about Apple. There were many people who thought that Apple were idiots when they went into the retail business, but it became a very successful operation. And it used to be you could organize, you'd go online, you'd set up a meeting with the Genius Bar, and get customer support. Now, they've scaled in such a way that they can't do the level of customer support that they once did. And I have information on this that many people who've bought Apple, spent a lot of money with Apple, are unhappy with customer support. So Apple is going to have to rethink the notion of maintenance and customer support. So yes, many of these things are, music is relatively easier to scale, etc., depending on how you want to encrypt things, etc. Payments is relatively easy to scale, but you want to be careful because if you scale them the wrong way, fraud and theft will mean that your problems also scale, and the reserves and losses you have to set up will have to scale as well. So the challenge I think one has to address is how do we manage the economics of scaling? And I think one of the most intriguing things is how do companies pause and adapt to some of the problems that they're confronting before they go on to scale. I assume you ran into those sorts of issues as well. What's the one time where you had to stop before you scaled and went further?
I think actually since we're sort of chip and pin based over here, right. I mean fraud is not as complex as it is in the US still.
We're very innovative in that way.
Yeah, very. But I think actually coming back to what you said, what becomes more and more tricky to scale for most sort of digital companies is actually customer support. Because customers tend to demand support whether you think they are digital enough, right? So I think that's actually the part of the trickiest thing for most digital companies today.
Well, I think if you want to scale, you have to build a swarm and not a crowd, which means it's self-organizing and emergent. It's Airbnb and Uber, and it's not a big taxi firm, and it's not a big hotel chain. And then it will scale just beautifully, and the same might be true for your payment system.
Sure.
Well, we have time for just one more question. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Dariush Gatan. I'm the founder of Google and Innovation Pioneers. I think everything that's been said today becomes very interesting when you add risk to the perspective. For large organizations to work with smaller organizations, it's a way of mitigating risk. For small organizations to work with large organizations, it's a way of mitigating risks that investors can step in. If we look at, for instance, the first 6 months of 2015, how the US stock market paid for risk, we can see that companies that did not pay a dividend yielded less total value to its shareholders, more value to its shareholders than those that yielded dividend, because they knew the shareholders had a notion that they could handle risk and invest in new ideas and its performance. So I'd like to hear you elaborate a bit on risk in what all you've said today.
My quick response is, I don't know if you saw my talk this morning. I believe that one of the worst things that existed in financial services was the separating risk management from innovation. And then you had at the very top of the organization, the board of directors that didn't quite understand risk and didn't quite understand all the innovation going on, trying to reconcile the situation. One of the most important bits of advice I offer to my students and my clients is, how do you align risk appetite with investment in innovation? So I think it is a false dichotomy to discuss innovation without a risk conversation.
Yeah, so you have a portfolio. You need a portfolio, strategic portfolio allocation of your resources.
And you use innovation not just to talk about new value creation, but to get better insight into the risk appetite of the firm, which may be one of the other reasons why certain firms have to split. Because it's not just that the business models are different, but that the perceptions of risk and reward are different. And that's very, very hard. You never want to mix people who like risk with very, very conservative people. That's what you get in an investment bank. Commercial bank doesn't work so well from your UBS days.
Well, but being overly obsessed with risk, you end up in a situation like Nokia when they had a CEO who was a lawyer. And when that was the case, I was starting to get really worried for Nokia and observing the legal obsession or at many top-level discussions. I think a more engineering-like mindset and a willingness to embrace risk is absolute key.
Let me just say, comment there. Overly obsessed is not good about anything. whether it's risk or opportunity. You can't be overly obsessed about anything.
Too obsessed with non-risk, they go to Las Vegas.
Exactly.
I think only.
But you need to balance risk.
Yeah, I think only comment. I think the most important thing to me was this risk and versus reward and the incentives, and that's why you actually have a certain way of managing your company. And if you're a big corporation, you tend to reward for different things. And when you go to venture capital, I think the incentives are aligned in a totally different way for the entrepreneurs. By the way, the lawyer was followed by the sales guy and didn't go that much better. But then the engineer came and saved the game. Risto.
So looking from our perspective and just commenting on Michael's comment on risk, I mean, looking at our risk team, it's probably the core pillar of our operations. So that's probably different. But then looking on how to mitigate risk in terms of decision and product development, we tend to look at things similar to Google, roof shots and moon shots. So roof shots is typically things that can improve your sort of productivity or revenue, 10%, whereas moonshots is 10x revenue, and then allocating resources according to those possibilities, but also the risks.
I have to thank the panel for their participation and all of your questions. We'll continue the discussion over lunch.
Thank you.
Bjorn, I'll turn things back to you.
Let's continue the discussion around lunch.
So with that, I'm... Some very, very few words before we go up to grab our wrap and continue maybe some discussions. I think it's been quite mind-boggling what we have been through today here, both the speeches and the panels, and these are issues that we from different perspectives work on a daily basis, and therefore these kinds of discussions and inputs are needed. With Michael, we heard very much about pointing out the the customer as the human capital in businesses. I think that was very, very interesting, and with Peter, of course, the social quantum physics and the software to support that. I think there is a lot to be followed up. And in the TED video you showed in the end, it wasn't you on the video, we know that, but I'm still thinking about that video. Who am I? Am I in front, or am I a follower, or am I one of those, or am I sitting back there being the last, not the first adopter, but the last adopter? I think in different situations you can actually be either of them, depending on your own comfort zone or where you want to be. And maybe that's one thing to learn in that metaphor. You have a choice to, but also to recognize it is a metaphor. It probably has some weaknesses, but I think it was a very good one. We learned that innovation is about human beings. We learned that innovation is about culture, and innovation is about defining your business. I think we can take these 3 dimensions. Those were twisted back and forth with lots of details, examples, but also experience from the audience. I think we all have new input into our work, so we can leave here happily. Before I end, I want to thank speakers, all panelists. I want to thank specifically Randy, but also want to thank some people who have worked behind the scenes. Johan Weigelt sitting here, you may stand up, and Maria Dolhoff working with you, and some other. And to organize a seminar like this takes a lot of commitment from staff. We have Robert working with the technology. And if you look in there, you see it looks like probably the cockpit of a jumbo jet or something, with all of things that need to function, actually, and we're very happy for that support. With those words, we end this seminar. We know we're all tired. That's what you should be after a good seminar. And upstairs, there is a light lunch in terms of a wrap, and we can continue to mingle. Thank you very much for attending.